In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn in Marvel with Warhammer 40K Simulator? Part 2. If you enjoy this type of content, please slice the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Remember to check out the original story linked in the description. Without further ado, let's get into the legend of a conqueror hero. Your battered eyelids tremble continuously, and small flames gradually appear in the depths of your dark, hollow eyes. Then they blaze intensely, like an exploding star. Meanwhile, a skeletal hand engulfed in warp fire grips a catachan knife, slicing through the pink horrors around you, gently supporting your collapsing body. Behind you, Krieg soldiers in military coats and catachan veterans with red bandanas materialize out of thin air. Their flesh seems to have completely transformed into burning warp fire, the Emperor's unending wrath scorching the surrounding chaos demons. Carlos' bird head twists wildly, and in its terror, its beak slowly opens, preparing to unleash a terrifying warp psychic blast. However, shells heavily wrapped in warp fire suddenly soar over your head and explode on another of Carlos' bird heads. The Weaver, Carlos' massive body trembles, and even slight burns force it to stop brewing its spell. A Terminator in power armor burning with warp fire takes heavy steps and approaches behind you. Without orders or slogans, countless skeletal human soldiers silently charge, confronting the chaos demons surging from afar. Your muddled thoughts gradually clear, and the murmurs in your ears seem to disappear completely. Even though you have lost your eyes, you can still clearly sense everything happening around you in the darkness. You tremble all over, your blood boiling, and your loyalty to the Emperor becomes even firmer. A catachan knife burning with warp fire is placed into your hand. You grasp it tightly, and a smile belonging to all the fallen appears on your tragic face. You quickly prepare for battle, taking difficult steps, charging forward. All the Krieg soldiers follow your steps, raising the bayonets on their lost guns. Catachan veterans with red bandanas wield knives and pull the triggers of their weapons, continuously sweeping away the chaos demons surging around them. You let out a desperate roar. You raise the catachan knife towards the bewildered Weaver Carlos. Brilliant lights like those of a star spill from your eye sockets, drifting behind you, as if forming a pair of vast, invisible wings. You step on the bodies of several dead demons in front of you and leap into the air. Slash, slash, slash. In a daze, a faint murmur seems to echo in your ears once more, then vanishes instantly. You muster all your strength and swing the catachan knife burning with warp fire. Perhaps it is the Emperor's blessing, but you manage to stab precisely into the wildly shaking bird head of Carlos, blinding one of its eyes. The Weaver, Carlos, lets out a painful screech as the warp fire fiercely burns its insolent bird head. Terrifying warp psychic energy instantly erupts from Carlos, shattering your arms, shoulders, and the rest of your body. You have no time to evade, and your body is torn apart by the psychic energy. You are dead. This simulation has ended, taking 9 hours. You have gained selectable rewards from this simulation. 1. Tsench's Blessing and Curse. Choose cautiously. Note: Tsench is displeased with your tenacious resistance. Yet she generously grants you the Ascension Blessing to become a Demon Prince. However, you may not be able to withstand the overwhelming chaotic power. 2. Korn's Attention and Blessing. Choose cautiously. Note: Korn has developed a slight favor for your refusal of Tsench's temptation. If you accept her blessing and are willing to become Korn's chosen, she will occasionally observe your actions and grant you more power. Only seeking slaughter, no need for loyalty. 3. Evercool Plasma Pistol Mastercrafted Relic. Note: the Emperor's gaze upon you has never wavered. Since this simulation lasted less than 24 hours, the simulator's wear and tear has been waived. Current cooldown time available: 5 days and 21 hours, 141 hours. The simulation ends. However, in the factory, Zaire couldn't help but widen his eyes. He had actually been transported to a chaos-ridden planet occupied by a dark god. Without the Emperor's protection, he might not have been able to even commit suicide and escape. Wasting a simulation opportunity was no big deal. But if Tsench had kept Zaire half dead, unable to die, Zaire couldn't help but take a deep breath. He couldn't imagine how much cooldown time would be needed to compensate for the simulator's loss. And he wouldn't gain any enhancements or equipment. Even though Zaire wasn't weak now, he still felt powerless against the many formidable villains in this universe. Zaire quickly made an important decision. Before each simulation, he would pray to the Emperor, to gain the Emperor's protection and prevent similar accidents from happening again. With peace of mind, Zaire examined the simulator's rewards. He couldn't help but criticize Tsench's pettiness in his mind. At the same time, he felt troubled by Korn's favor. Indeed, the Warhammer universe was not a world a mere mortal like him could traverse. Fortunately, Zaire's simulator was just a simulation, and not a real person going in. Otherwise, desperate Zaire could only choose to pledge loyalty on the spot, soul returning to the Golden Throne. Zaire without hesitation chose the third reward. A plain and unadorned plasma pistol appeared in his hand. Excited, Zaire carefully examined the relic in his hand. It seemed to be a Mark III Sunfury pattern plasma pistol. The iron-gray gun body emitted a cold metallic luster, drawing attention. The exposed cooling vents glowed faintly, as if brewing endless energy. Ever cool. Zaire didn't hesitate and immediately fired repeatedly at the fallen bodies in the factory. ZZZ, ZZZZ, blinding plasma balls the size of human heads shot from the muzzle in the blink of an eye. Before Zaire could react, the bodies before him had turned to ashes. Even parts of the concrete floor melted from the high temperature, glowing with an orange-red light. The power of the relic pistol far exceeded his expectations. More importantly, it lacked the cooling time needed after consecutive shots typical of ordinary plasma pistols. As long as the hydrogen fuel was sufficient, the Evercool plasma pistol was a mobile artillery piece in Zaire's hands. Zaire, holding the plasma pistol, burst into laughter. This seemed to be the first time in a while that he had laughed so heartily, like a child who had just received his favorite toy. When Zaire returned home, his aunt was still overseeing the restaurant renovations and hadn't come back yet. He took out his shoulder bag and packed his Katakan knife and plasma pistol. Zaire changed into a set of clothes and military boots. Then he retrieved a stack of cash from a duffel bag under the bed, planning to leave. Before heading out, Zaire sent a text message to his aunt, explaining that he was going to do some part-time work. Without waiting for her reply, he turned off his phone and tossed it onto the bed. Zaire walked out of the apartment and began his preparations. Facing a whole gang of core members, his proven killing techniques and the powerful plasma pistol were sufficient. However, he still needed some auxiliary means to prevent them from escaping and scattering. So, as his shopping list grew, he had to buy another hiking backpack as a container. After finishing his shopping, Zaire walked down the street, feeling an unbearable hunger. He looked around and found a hot dog stand. He began eating voraciously. In a short time, the vendor could barely keep up with his eating speed. After consuming 15 hot dogs, Zaire paid the bill while the vendor looked at him with awe. Zaire turned to leave, but he hadn't walked far when he heard a pleading voice behind him. "Excuse me, sir, could you look at this missing person flyer?" Zaire raised an eyebrow and turned back. "Mike." Zaire. Standing before him was Mike, the apprentice and handyman at the delicious restaurant. Mike hadn't recognized Zaire at first, because he looked so different from before. Only when Zaire spoke did Mike's memory align with the Zaire in front of him. "Oh my God, young people in their growth period are truly a miracle of life," Mike instinctively exclaimed. "Maybe, Mike. Still no news about your brother?" Zaire asked politely, taking the flyer from Mike and glancing at it. The flyer was crudely made, with only a black and white photo and contact information. The photo showed a boy with a missing front tooth, a deformed left hand, and a birth defect in his ear. Despite his imperfections, the boy's bright smile left a strong impression. Nothing. It's like he vanished into thin air. Mike's face was full of anxiety and exhaustion. He forced a bitter smile and said, "Mom is on the verge of a breakdown, so I have to step up, but Jerry has been missing for so long." Mike didn't finish, but Zaire understood. He silently nodded, folded the flyer, and stuffed it into his shoulder bag. "Have you tried asking the media for help? You must have seen the recent big news. Now is a good time to pressure the police." Of course I tried, but the media is surrounded by parents with missing children. Mike shook his head with a helpless sigh. Rich families can go on TV and tell their warm stories. But families like ours from poor neighborhoods can only get a small missing person notice in the papers. Better than nothing, I guess. After hearing Mike's words, Zaire was speechless. He pondered for a moment and took out a small stack of cash from his pocket. It was the leftover money from his shopping, $1,500. Zaire kept 5 bills for himself and gave the rest to Mike. Mike's eyes widened in shock, and his dark skin seemed to flush. He repeatedly refused. No, Zaire. This is too much. Mike, take it. Consider it an advance on your salary, Zaire said with a smile. My aunt is still waiting for her handyman apprentice to come back to work. Thank you. Mike's eyes seemed to moisten. He choked up but held back his tears. Thank you. I just don't know how to thank you. Finding Jerry is the best thanks. No need to say more. After all, friends need to help each other, right? Zaire said seriously. Seeing Mike carefully put away the cash without further refusal, Zaire said goodbye and left. He had an important part-time job to do. Hell's Kitchen baby store. As the third-generation leader of the tracksuit mafia, Fat Bob was as massive as a wild boar, and his behavior was just as similar. Greed was his feeding instinct, and brutality was his reproductive desire. This was why he could control the entire gang, at least until a few days ago. Now, Fat Bob could only curl his huge body on a dusty sofa, eating furiously while staring at his phone. He was waiting for a call from the Kingpin, a call that could save his gang and his life. However, even after filling his stomach with overly sweet tomato pasta, the phone remained silent. Fat Bob gradually fell into despair and deep pain. He realized that the once dominant tracksuit mafia had been abandoned. The Kingpin's empire did not want to attract more attention from the public and the authorities. The tracksuit mafia had to disappear, both physically and spiritually. Useless. You're all useless. At that moment, Fat Bob's plump cheeks quivered. Bang! He threw the can of tomato pasta on the floor. The thick dust mixed with the red sauce looked like shattered red intestines. Damn Kingpin. Damn Enweedy. Damn New Yorkers. As time passed, Fat Bob's eyes turned blood red, and he appeared insane. His entire body trembled violently. It seemed the immense pressure of reality had driven him to a mental breakdown. Just then, Fat Bob struggled to get up. He moved his legs, like a rampaging wild boar, and rushed out of the store. Thud, thud, thud. The heavy footsteps caught the attention of the gang members downstairs. They looked up with varied expressions, gazing at Fat Bob standing on the store's stairs. I declare, tonight, we will give New York City a big surprise. With blood-red eyes, Fat Bob slowly raised his hands, clenching them into fists. He shouted crazily, "Do you want to eat fresh food? Do you want to sleep with beautiful women? Do you want to walk freely in the sunlight? So what if the police are hunting us? So what if the Kingpin abandoned us? Are we supposed to be scared? We are the gang that rules New York. We have plenty of weapons and ammunition. Come on, bring your guns and join my crazy party." Fat Bob's spittle flew as he raved like a madman. However, his passionate speech did not resonate with anyone. The gang members exchanged silent glances, a cold glint flashing in their eyes. At that moment, Fat Bob stood on the stairs, panting heavily and sweating profusely. He keenly noticed the undercurrents among the gang members. Fat Bob's chubby face twisted into a deranged grin. Anyone who joins the party will share the gang's funds. You can split the money right now. After the party, if we succeed, you can also share the cleaned funds in overseas accounts. Equally. Before Fat Bob finished speaking, nearly 40 gang members smiled knowingly. Click, click, click. The sound of countless guns being loaded almost merged into one. Come on, let's burn this city to ashes. Clad in an oversized bulletproof vest, Fat Bob's bloodshot eyes glared around the dimly lit room, scanning his eager subordinates, who were rubbing their hands in anticipation. The deranged smile on his face twisted with madness. Tomorrow morning, the whole of New York will be shocked. The entire nation, even the whole world, will be stunned. The damn Kingpin thinks he can hide. Foolish. I, Fat Bob, will use the lives of countless New Yorkers to drag you out into the open. Even if the entire gang is wiped out and the feds launch an investigation afterward, those filthy deals will be exposed to the sunlight. Underground King. You'll become a stray dog. Slavs, never surrender. Good. I've distributed all the money in the warehouse to you. Fat Bob's face turned red as he grinned, his chubby cheeks shaking with excitement. Now it's time for you to repay me. Our only target is to kill as many as you can. Do whatever you want. Before that, the smuggling boats are already docked at the Hudson River port. If all goes well, you will join me on the ship, and we'll share even more wealth. Yura. Fat Bob raised his fist and shook his arm vigorously, shouting continuously. At that moment, Fat Bob noticed something. A blue orb the size of a human head flew past the shelves and appeared right in front of him in the blink of an eye. Boom! Plasma exploded instantly. The brilliant burst of electric light completely engulfed Fat Bob. The extreme heat turned his 200-kilogram body to ashes in seconds. Bang! 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 Simultaneously, more plasma orbs surged from the dark corners, creating a frenzied thunderstorm. What is that? A ghost. Ball lightning. These phenomena, beyond human comprehension, stunned the gang members. They screamed and shouted, but none dared to raise their weapons in retaliation. As Fat Bob's ashes scattered to the ground, someone finally reacted. But it was too late. The countless plasma orbs not only enveloped everyone present, but also detonated the grenades piled on the floor. Boom, boom, boom. The air seemed to tremble. The intense shockwaves shattered all the glass in the precious mall, making them crackle. At that moment, a tall figure clad in a black waterproof coat, with hair wrapped in a red bandana and wearing a gas mask, emerged from the shadows. He walked through the residual flames and the flickering flashlight beams, as if strolling down a rain-freshened street into the bloody slaughterhouse. The ground was littered with broken bodies and ashes, with occasional twitching limbs. The silent figure stepped over them, seemingly unaffected by the carnage. Zaire glanced around at the gruesome scene, his breath echoing inside his mask, drowning out any discomfort. This reminded him of the good old days in the underground tunnels. Even though Zaire was mentally prepared, he still underestimated the plasma gun's power. In mere seconds, over 30 fully armed men had vanished from the world. The unexpected grenade detonations contributed to the chaos, but that's how real battles are, full of surprises. Zaire stepped through the sticky blood, surveying the smoke-filled scene to ensure no one was left alive. He hesitated, then bent down to pick up the intact weapons among the remains. After a quick scan with his simulator, only 18 guns met the criteria and were absorbed as cooling time. Increased cooling time, 18 hours. That was a huge loss. Zaire muttered to himself, regretting his reckless action. He had planned to set traps and assassinate quietly, then use the powerful plasma gun only after the bodies were discovered to end the fight. But Fat Bob's mad speech caught him off guard, leaving no time for preparation. He had no choice but to use the plasma gun to try and prevent the gang from causing more deaths in Hell's Kitchen. The result, though, was exceptionally effective. At that moment, Zaire, wearing his gas mask, took a deep breath and remembered something. He started searching the area more thoroughly. Sure enough, he found several black packages among the debris. Opening them, he found bundles of cash, Fat Bob's promised payment. Well, not a total loss. Without counting the money, Zaire picked up the black packages and headed for the mall's exit. The explosions and smoke would soon attract police or criminals. As the culprit, Zaire needed to leave the scene quickly. Just as Zaire reached the mall's entrance, a dark red short staff suddenly shot out from the shadows. Sensing danger, Zaire dropped the packages. His dark Katarn combat knife instantly rose, intercepting the staff. Clang! The metal staff was sliced in half by the sharp blade. Zaire crouched slightly, muscles tensing, ready for combat. At the same time, a tall, slender figure in dark red armor stepped out of the shadows, twirling a staff that hummed ominously. Daredevil. Zaire's voice was low, coming through the gas mask. Stay out of this. They were just gang criminals. Red bandana? I thought you were just a myth made up by the police for the media. Daredevil, with his dark red mask and small horns glowing faintly, listened intently. Hell's Kitchen is my territory. You've crossed the line, and you shouldn't kill. Before he finished speaking, Daredevil lunged forward, his staff extending like a living creature towards Zaire's head. Humph! Zaire snorted through his gas mask. He said nothing more, raising his Katarn knife. The blade clashed with the staff, sending it flying. In that brief moment, Daredevil closed the distance, less than a meter away. As his staff retracted, he stepped forward, knee aiming for Zair's abdomen. Zair's left fist met the knee with a heavy thud. The impact caused both to recoil slightly. Zair's reaction was faster, instinctively reaching for his plasma gun to finish the fight. But reason held him back, causing a moment of hesitation. Daredevil seized this opportunity. He raised his foot, kicking Zair's chest with a force that sent him flying 3 meters back, crashing heavily. Seeing his opponent weakened, Daredevil relaxed slightly, twirling his staff as he approached. But he stopped suddenly, listening. Zair, hand on his chest, showed no emotion behind his mask. He slowly stood up, twisting his neck slightly. Instead of drawing his plasma gun, he tore off his waterproof coat and tossed it aside. He then reversed his grip on the knife, the blade facing outwards. "Oh, Matt Murdock," Zair said, his voice cold. "I won't rest until you're in a hospital bed. This isn't over. This thing, it's not over. Who are you?" Their cover suddenly blown, Daredevil, shocked, instinctively swung his short baton. The silver-tipped end shot towards Zair's head like a guided dart, pulled by a wire. Zair remained silent, unperturbed. In an instant, he swung his Katakan knife, deflecting the baton once again. Zair then stomped the ground with his combat boots and charged at Daredevil. Daredevil responded in kind, rushing towards Zair. But his movements lacked the previous fluidity, hindered by an increasing sense of anxiety. As they closed the distance, Daredevil, frustrated by the lack of response, raised his arm and unleashed a fierce punch. Bang! Zair, anticipating the attack, blocked it with his elbow, producing a dull thud. Bang! Zair followed up with the flat of his Katakan knife, striking Daredevil's shoulder. Despite the armor he wore, the force of Zair's blow made him stagger, nearly losing his balance. Seizing the moment, Zair quickly grabbed Daredevil's arm as he tried to retrieve his baton for a counterattack. "Huh!" With a shout, Zair twisted his waist, executing a powerful throw that sent Daredevil crashing into a pile of abandoned shelves, landing heavily a few meters away, raising clouds of dust and debris. Zair's eyes narrowed behind his mask, as if he had found Daredevil's weakness. His physical strength was clearly inferior. Without giving him time to recover, Zair closed the distance again. He grabbed Daredevil's collar, his muscles tensing as he lifted him off the ground. Using centrifugal force, Zair spun half a circle and released his grip, sending Daredevil flying once more. Daredevil crashed into a dilapidated wall, creating a dark, gaping hole. Zair, relentless, sprinted towards him, ready to strike again. Just as he was about to bring the flat of his knife down on the bleeding Daredevil, Zair froze, his gaze fixed on the dark hole in the wall. Illuminated by scattered flashlight beams and flickering flames, something seemed to be swaying in the depths of the wall. Zair dropped the incapacitated Daredevil and began hacking at the wall with his knife, trying to widen the opening. Cough! Daredevil, regaining consciousness, clenched his fist at Zair's back. But as he tried to speak, the sound waves in his ears painted a picture of what lay behind the wall, stopping him in his tracks, his body stiffening with shock. The sound of Zair's knife against the wall felt like invisible nails hammering into Daredevil's heart. He bent down, picked up his baton, and silently joined Zair in tearing down the wall. 5 minutes later, the wall was completely dismantled, revealing a hidden 20-square-meter storage room. Inside, countless bodies were hanging in transparent vacuum-sealed bags, filled with preservatives, yet still reeking of decay. Even Zair's gas mask couldn't block the stench. What horrified them most was that all the bodies were children. Their bodies had been eviscerated, their organs removed without any attempt at stitching them back up. Even their eyes had been taken, leaving hollow sockets. Zair and Daredevil stood still, staring at the grim scene. One particular bag caught Zair's attention, a black boy with a deformed hand. Zair's fingers trembled as he turned the body to see the boy's ear, which was also deformed. "Jerry," Zair murmured, recognizing Big Mouth Mike's lost brother, now a cold, rotting corpse. "Heretic." Zair's chest burned with rage at the sight of the children's fate. The horrors inflicted upon them made him sympathize with the Warhammer 40K Imperial ideology. Heretics and chaos must die. Chaos! Zair's angry voice echoed through the empty hall, snapping Daredevil back to reality. He gently lifted one of the children's bodies from a hook, like a loving priest performing a baptism. Filled with reverence and sorrow, Zair, gripping his knife, walked to the center of the blood-soaked battlefield, looking for any remaining heads. With swift, precise cuts, he decapitated the corpses. "What are you doing?" Daredevil rasped, his voice full of confusion. Without turning around, Zaire replied coldly, "A tribute to the children." Daredevil knelt, holding a child's body, and began to pray softly. Zaire, meanwhile, placed the heads nearby and continued his grim task. Though Daredevil, who had never killed, did not stop Zaire's brutal actions, and Zaire did not interrupt Daredevil's futile prayers. At that moment, both men, despite their different life experiences, found common ground. They each comforted the children's souls in their own way. Half an hour later, the two went their separate ways before the police arrived. Zaire had lost interest in continuing his confrontation with Daredevil. The exposed Daredevil also lacked the energy and motivation to stop Zaire from taking the loot. Since discovering the bodies, a burning rage seemed to inflame Zaire's chest, making him wish he could eliminate all the gangs in New York. However, on the way home, as Zaire dealt with most of the disposable equipment, his gradually returning sense of reason curbed his impulses. The gang had been eradicated, and the crisis involving him and his aunt had disappeared. The remaining issues were no longer his responsibility. Even the most ineffective federal government would mobilize its forces in response to such shocking events. The New York Police Department, the FBI, and perhaps even SHIELD might get involved in the investigation. If the media learned more details and sensationalized the reports, Stark, all the way in Los Angeles, might even get involved. In the age of technology, with the omnipresent artificial intelligence Jarvis, even the cautious Zaire had no confidence in hiding. He would eventually face the authorities, but not yet. His priority was to act low-key and bide his time until he possessed greater power and could face everything with greater composure. He was never a hero, just an ordinary person fighting for his survival. Half an hour later, the two went their separate ways before the police arrived. Zaire had lost interest in continuing his confrontation with Daredevil. The exposed Daredevil also lacked the energy and motivation to stop Zaire from taking the loot. Since discovering the bodies, a burning rage seemed to inflame Zaire's chest, making him wish he could eliminate all the gangs in New York. However, on the way home, as Zaire dealt with most of the disposable equipment, his gradually returning sense of reason curbed his impulses. The gang had been eradicated, and the crisis involving him and his aunt had disappeared. The remaining issues were no longer his responsibility. Even the most ineffective federal government would mobilize its forces in response to such shocking events. The New York Police Department, the FBI, and perhaps even SHIELD might get involved in the investigation. If the media learned more details and sensationalized the reports, Stark, all the way in Los Angeles, might even get involved. In the age of technology, with the omnipresent artificial intelligence Jarvis, even the cautious Zaire had no confidence in hiding. He would eventually face the authorities, but not yet. His priority was to act low-key and bide his time until he possessed greater power and could face everything with greater composure. He was never a hero, just an ordinary person fighting for his family. At 4 a.m, Zaire, returning from Hell's Kitchen, entered his apartment. He did not go straight home, but headed to the basement. Now reinforced, the basement could temporarily serve as a secret base. Zaire, sleepless, sorted and counted the ill-gotten funds he had acquired. The cash amounted to $1.98 million. Adding the $680,000 remaining under his bedroom bed, he had a total of $2.66 million. In one night, Zaire had returned to being a millionaire. Unfortunately, the large amount of dirty money could not be deposited into the bank all at once unless he was willing to spend time depositing it bit by bit. After stowing away all the cash and hiding the katana, Zaire locked the basement door and went upstairs. Entering his home, Zaire seemed to leave all his troubles outside the door. He carefully took a shower and then found some food in the refrigerator. As the cold food slowly entered his stomach, Zaire began to regain the familiar feeling of safety that came with being at home. He did not wake his aunt, who was still asleep, and after eating, he returned to his bedroom. Placing the plasma handgun next to his pillow, he fell asleep slowly. 23 bodies of children were lined up in a row, neatly arranged on the floor. 13 bloody and mutilated heads formed a horrific mound in front of the children's bodies. It seemed like both a memorial and a release of rage. This was the horrifying scene that greeted the tardy New York police when they first stepped into the wrecked toy store. At that moment, the faces of both experienced officers and new recruits turned pale. They could not endure the rising urge to vomit and rushed outside to the parking lot to heave. Despite repeated orders from their superiors, no one was willing to enter the scene a second time. Work-related repercussions were secondary compared to the psychological scars that would last a lifetime. Thus, this awkward situation continued until the FBI intervened early, barely starting the basic investigation of the toy store. But even the seasoned FBI agents were at a loss when faced with the complex identities of the numerous dead and the unclear nature of the case, especially since the children's bodies might be related to previous news reports about child abductions. The FBI began hoping that this hot potato would be passed up the chain for other departments to handle. Zaire was awakened from his sleep by his aunt's voice. He opened his eyes to see his aunt, dressed in pajamas, standing at the bedroom door. His aunt never entered his room without reason. Taking a deep breath, Zaire got up and asked, "Aunt, what's wrong? Big news." "Stark," his aunt, excitedly waving her arms, described to Zaire, "that billionaire Tony Stark has revealed his identity as a hero." Zaire's brow furrowed as he blinked. Could it be? So soon? He got up and followed his aunt into the living room. The television was repeatedly showing Stark revealing his Iron Man identity. Even though Zaire kept switching channels, every station was reporting the same story. The billionaire Stark had returned after going missing and had turned into a superhero. This was the current explosive news, completely overshadowing the earlier child abduction case, which had become yesterday's news. Even his aunt, who had been informed about heroes by Zaire, was now caught up in the excitement. Not to mention the public, who needed daily entertainment and distraction. However, Zaire wasn't particularly thrilled. Stark's revelation of his hero identity had thrown the entire world into a chaotic state filled with bizarre characters, especially with heroes like Daredevil, who used to be mere regulars in police files and urban legends in the Steel City. From now on, as superheroes emerged, more dangerous supervillains would also appear. Seeing his aunt start to use her phone to share various gossip, Zaire, increasingly overshadowed by a sense of crisis, decided to proceed with his next simulation. The cooldown period required him to purchase a large amount of weaponry to replenish his supplies. After all, the dirty money needed a way to be converted into Zaire's power. Zaire told his aunt he was heading back to his room. Instead of immediately starting the simulation, he sat cross-legged on the floor. Calmly, Zaire offered a brief but fervent prayer to the Emperor. "Emperor, grant me your blessing." With a solemn expression, Zaire activated the simulator. After encountering an evil god in his previous simulation as a Krieg Grenadier, Zaire hesitated for a moment and chose random arrival. Simulation starting. Current identity: Katakan Newbie Krieg Grenadier. Please select arrival identity. If you refuse, it will be randomly assigned. Identity selection refused. Simulation starting. You have arrived in the Warhammer universe. Time: unknown. Location: galaxy, unknown star system, Peli. You have arrived on the surface of a planet. You find yourself inside an escape pod. You don't have time to observe your surroundings. You are assaulted by an overpowering, nauseating stench. You fall into uncontrollable unconsciousness. Political officer: another one. You seem to hear some noise before losing consciousness completely. You wake up from unconsciousness and open your eyes. Your sense of smell is once again assaulted by the nauseating stench. You immediately feel dizzy and lightheaded, struggling for a while before you manage to recover. Your sense of smell and taste are malfunctioning. They seem to be out of order. Your unusual condition appears to have attracted the attention of others. A distinguished-looking middle-aged officer dressed in Imperial Commissar uniform steps out of the shadows and approaches you. "I distinctly remember there being only me and Yulgin in the escape pod," the middle-aged officer says, staring at you intently. The officer's wide-brimmed hat is slightly askew, possibly due to the high temperature inside the escape pod. He casually loosens the collar of his uniform, revealing a patch of thick, dense chest hair. You regain your composure and inform him that everything is according to the Emperor's arrangement. You pledge your loyalty to the Empire and your willingness to serve the Emperor. The officer scrutinizes you for a moment before holstering his laser pistol. He gives you a brilliant, toothy smile and seems to accept your words. Young stranger, I have good news and bad news. Which would you like to hear first? The officer's smile remains unwavering. You hesitate for a moment before deciding to hear the bad news first. The bad news is that we are surrounded by an endless swarm of greenskins. Yuljan's old fear of flying flared up, and the escape pod he piloted brought us straight into the orcs' rear lines. More importantly, we don't have much weaponry or ammunition, and our food supplies are running low. The officer describes the current situation with no attempt to hide anything. You agree that this is indeed very bad news. Despite the grim news, the officer's indifference somehow gives you hope. You eagerly ask for the good news. The good news. In this dire situation, at least we have 3 people to face it. The officer's distinguished face finally reveals a long-hidden smirk. You realize the truth and can't help but shake your head and sigh. Having one more person to deal with the greenskins is likely the real reason the officer is willing to trust you. Even the forces of chaos would prefer not to face a horde of ravenous greenskins alone. You gradually come to understand the current situation. You demonstrate some of your combat skills, earning the officer's approval. You attempt to ask the officer's name. Syafas Kane, Commissar of the Valhalla 597th Regiment. Young soldier, no matter where you came from, welcome to the 597th Regiment. For the Emperor, the Commissar named Kane says to you with sincere eyes. You choose to join the 597th Regiment and become a soldier under Commissar Kane. Through Kane's introduction, you come to know the true source of the terrible stench, Kane's aide. Yuljan, a first-class gunner, is a coarse man plagued by the stench and severe skin conditions. You try to communicate with Yuljan, but he is very resistant to you, a mysterious newcomer. Commissar Kane assures him that you are a trustworthy Imperial warrior. Yuljan seems to heed Kane's explanation and reluctantly accepts your presence. On the first day, you accompany the surly Yuljan to scavenge all the supplies from the escape pod. After careful organization, you and Yuljan find that the supplies originally enough for 2 people for about half a month can now only last for a week due to your unexpected inclusion. Yuljan expresses dissatisfaction with this, and you offer to reduce your food rations. Commissar Kane immediately rejects this suggestion, stating that 3 people cannot afford to just wait for Imperial rescue, which is unrealistic. Now, the only way for the 3 of you to survive is to traverse the greenskin lines and enter the Empire's controlled territory. On the second day before departure, Yuljan carries all the food supplies and hefts his heavy meltagun. Even though he's overburdened, he refuses to share the extra weapon with you. Only after Commissar Kane persuades him does Yuljan grudgingly give you a laser pistol, but only 1 energy cell. You have no objections. A laser pistol is much better than facing the roaring greenskins unarmed. On the 3rd day, while taking a brief rest in a forest, you unexpectedly encounter a small group of wandering greenskins. Your precise shooting and ruthless efficiency in dealing with them impress Commissar Kane, who praises you. Even the stubborn Yuljan is forced to admit your excellence and, surprisingly, gives you 2 extra energy cells. On the 4th day, due to Yuljan's poor sense of direction, you end up in a flatland area. You face another wave of greenskin attacks. Kane recognizes them as belonging to the Evil Sun's clan, known for their obsession with speed and engine noise, who paint their vehicles red to increase their speed 3-fold. You, Kane, and Yuljan flee in a panic, barely managing to shake off the pursuing greenskins. After a brief rest, you discover that your already sparse energy cells are completely lost and Yuljan's food supplies are down by a day's worth. On the 5th day, your hunger is overwhelming, and you can only quench your appetite with precious fresh water. Kane divides the food he had given to Yuljan once more, and you attempt to refuse. However, Commissar Kane insists that he doesn't believe in having soldiers fight on an empty stomach, and that you need to maintain your fighting capability. In the evening, Yuljan approaches you hesitantly and hands you a few precious candies while expressing regret over the lost supplies. You smile and try to comfort the stubborn Yuljan, reassuring him that the Emperor will protect the 3 of you. On the 6th day, under Kane's leadership, you encounter no further greenskin harassment. Perhaps due to the Emperor's favor, you even find a place to replenish fresh water, and there's no sign of greenskins around. By the end of the 1st week, you have lost considerable weight. Thanks to the ample supply of fresh water, your spirits remain somewhat high, while Kane and Yuljan look noticeably haggard. Your food supplies are now completely exhausted. You boldly suggest that perhaps the greenskin meat could be edible. Kane and Yuljin exchange looks but do not dismiss your question. Rather, they seem eager to consider it. In the second week, the three of you still don't get to taste the local delicacy, greenskin barbecue. As you approach the brink of collapse, you encounter a small group of defeated local defenders. Driven by hunger, Kane reveals his identity as an Imperial Commissar and temporarily takes command of the squad. You find heaps of ant skinner cans and combat rations in a Chimera infantry transport vehicle. Overwhelmed with excitement, you share the bounty with Kane and Yuljin. However, just as you're about to sleep after a hearty meal, Kane approaches you with a serious expression. Be cautious, they might be traitors. Commissar Kane warns in a low voice. You sigh and ready your laser pistol once more. After warming up, following a brief skirmish, all the rebels surprisingly surrendered. You realize that this small group of defenders before you are not rebels. They are simply an army of ordinary men who were terrified by the advancing green skins. Even their battle cry reveals their fear of being sent to the front lines by the Imperial Commissar to die. You once again executed a few rebels who tried to incite the soldiers. Comrade Jurgen hefted his ever-reliable heavy meltagun, signaling the imminent start of a brutal massacre. Commissar Kane promptly stopped the savage actions of you and Jurgen. Kane climbed atop a Chimera infantry fighting vehicle and delivered an impassioned speech to the dejected, fleeing defenders about retreating as a form of advance, his words filled with vigor. You remain noncommittal, but before the speech ends, the entire defensive force surrounds Commissar Kane with enthusiastic support. All the soldiers are invigorated, seemingly eager to fight the greenskins 300 more times. Miraculously, Commissar Kane obtains command over this small defensive force. Baffled, you approach Kane for an explanation. Smiling, Commissar Kane responds that he merely gave them hope for survival. In the third week, as you transitioned to motorized transport, you encountered more local refugees fleeing, as well as more defenders defeated by the greenskins. After careful consideration, Commissar Kane, using his excellent oratory skills, rallied the scattered soldiers and calmed the terrified local refugees, forming a large convoy of escapees. Secretly, you and Jurgen dealt with some dissidents while also taking on the arduous duty of protecting the local refugees. However, as your numbers and equipment grew, your large and unwieldy convoy began attracting more attention from the greenskins. They rode in ramshackle, makeshift motorbikes, brandishing large blades and oversized guns, launching relentless attacks on your convoy. In the fourth week, the situation worsened. Despite ample food supplies and weapons, the increasing number of greenskins became a more deadly issue. Commissar Kane speculates that an orc warlord has discovered your convoy and ordered a pursuit. You and Comrade Jurgen gradually became exhausted from the frequent encounters with the greenskins. Following Commissar Kane's suggestion, you temporarily put down your lost gun and awkwardly attempted to command the defenders now fully under your control, barely becoming an officer, shifting your focus from fighting to overseeing the entire battlefield. You led the defenders in various skirmishes, struggling to fend off the relentless greenskins. During a brief rest for the convoy, Commissar Kane approached you with a grave expression, warning that if you couldn't shake off the large number of greenskins trailing your convoy, reaching the Imperial territory would be difficult. Revitalized, you volunteered to lead a suicide squad of defenders to divert the greenskins' attack. Commissar Kane, smiling slightly, gently refused, stating that the Valhalla 597th Regiment does not abandon comrades in battle. In the fifth week, you, Commissar Kane, Comrade Jurgen, and a group of defenders who volunteered for the suicide squad, chose a Chimera infantry fighting vehicle with a stable machine spirit and launched a fierce counterattack against the greenskins trailing the convoy. Your mission was simple: attract the greenskins' attention, buying time for the refugee convoy. The battle's ferocity exceeded expectations. Half of the 10 Suicide Squad defenders were killed or injured, but you barely accomplished your task, drawing away many greenskins. Inside the rapidly speeding Chimera, you tended to your wounds, glancing at Commissar Kane, who was miraculously unharmed. In the sixth week, under Commissar Kane's leadership, the remaining 8 members of your Suicide Squad engaged in guerrilla warfare with the greenskins. When the greenskins stopped to rest, you harassed them with grenades. When they pursued in anger, you used the Chimera's mobility and firepower to evade them. With the increasing frequency of battles, The 5 remaining defenders in the Suicide Squad significantly improved their combat skills, no longer fearing the greenskins, but rather eager to fight them. You gradually approached Imperial territory, and Comrade Jurgen believed victory was near. Even you couldn't help but agree. Unfortunately, the Orc warlord, having awaited your arrival, blocked your path. A sudden ambush caught you off guard, instantly reducing the Suicide Squad by 3. Surrounded by countless greenskins, the Chimera's mobility advantage was nullified. Facing imminent doom, Commissar Kane proposed a plan to capture the leader to defeat the army. Without hesitation, you silently prepared several powerful meltabombs. The Suicide Squad members used the Chimera's firepower to distract the greenskins while you, Commissar Kane, and Jurgen charged towards the Orc warlord. Comrade Jurgen's heavy meltagun cleared a temporary path towards the Orc warlord. You charged ahead of Commissar Kane, your lost gun firing indiscriminately, hitting a green skin with almost every shot. However, the green skins kept coming, like an unending tide, surrounding you both. You and Commissar Kane were trapped among the green skins, with Comrade Jurgen's heavy meltagun about to run out of power. In the nick of time, you showed Commissar Kane the meltabombs you carried. Hesitant at first, Commissar Kane eventually nodded resolutely. Using the path cleared by Jurgen's meltagun, you launched a final, desperate charge towards the Orc warlord. Just 5 meters from the Orc warlord, gravely injured, you were forced to prematurely detonate the meltabombs, hoping to harm the warlord. Instantly, the extreme heat vaporized you into ash. You died. Simulation over. Duration 42 days. Rewards available for Selection 1. Imperial Infantry Handbook, complete set. 2. Meltabomb 1. 3. Commissar Kane's Chainsword Mastercraft. Simulation exceeded 24 hours. Simulator wear and tear not waived. Cooldown 42 hours. Available cooldown time 160 hours. Do you wish to use the cooldown time? You have chosen to consume 42 hours of cooldown time. Current remaining cooldown time 118 hours. Zaire blinked a few times. He directly used the resource time to offset the simulation cooldown. Then, he smiled with astonishment. This time, he survived for a month and a half in the simulation. This was the highest record since Zaire obtained the simulator and went through several simulations. Could it be the Emperor's blessing, combined with the significant role of Commissar Kane? Zaire chuckled and dismissed the thought. His eyes returned to the reward options provided by the simulator. He quickly skimmed over the first 2 options without a second glance. Without hesitation, he chose the third option. Kafaz Kane's finely crafted chain word. This is one of the iconic weapons of the Warhammer universe. A bolt pistol in one hand and a chainsword in the other. Such a dashing combat image was not far from Zaire now. At least he had achieved half of it. Moreover, after so many simulations, Zaire understood. No matter how many weapons and pieces of equipment he acquired in the simulation, he could only randomly obtain one when choosing rewards. And he could only select one of them, unless it was a gift from the Emperor, like the never-overheating plasma pistol. However, Zaire didn't wish for blessings every day. Once the Emperor's gaze fell upon him again, he might end up facing a chaos demon or getting tangled with the 4 gods. As Zaire's thoughts drifted, a chainsword, 1.5 meters long and half a foot wide, weighing 5 kilograms, suddenly appeared in his hand. Zaire leapt up from the ground. With a slight exertion of his arm, he swung the chainsword a few times. Even without starting the blade, the numerous sharp teeth on the single-edged chainsword cut through the air instantly, producing a deep hum. For Zaire, 5 kilograms was just the right weight. Swinging it felt substantial. Even with just the weight of the chainsword, it could easily crack open a human skull. Zaire grinned as he found the motor switch on the sword hilt. He pressed it. The chainsword's internal motor started instantly. A deafening roar filled the entire room. Vroom, vroom, vroom. Countless sharp teeth spun rapidly, creating a terrifying and mesmerizing blur. Excited, Zaire felt the intense vibrations in his hand and the thunderous roar in his ears, smiling brightly. Bang! However, Zaire's excitement didn't last long. The bedroom door was suddenly thrown open. His aunt stared at him in shock, chainsword in hand, with a silly grin on his face. Zaire, you. Before his wide-eyed aunt could speak, Zaire quickly switched off the motor. He smiled sheepishly and said, "Ha ha, it's all standard-issued gear." I was just taking it out for a bit. Oh, why do boys always like playing with weapons? The shock on his aunt's face quickly faded, as if her emotions had calmed down. She rolled her eyes and said in a complaining tone, "Be careful, don't hurt yourself, and find a place without people to play. The neighbor next door works the night shift." Before he could respond, the door closed again. Zaire stood in the bedroom, stunned. His expression turned puzzled. Did his aunt take the wrong medicine? Or did the precautions he took finally pay off? Zaire blinked a few times, unsure. However, he didn't dwell on it. After all, his aunt's support was a good thing, right? Reluctantly, he placed the chain's word on the bed. He pulled out an old laptop from his desk drawer. Opening Google Chrome, he began to search. Zaire vaguely remembered that the chain's word in the Warhammer universe required something called promethium as fuel. Unlike laser weapons, which could be recharged by heating, this was different. Frowning, Zaire searched repeatedly for a long time. He finally found the rare element promethium on a specialized forum. It cost about $60,000 per ton. Zaire couldn't help but laugh. Even if he used the chain's word until it was worn out, it probably wouldn't need a ton of fuel, right? As for whether this promethium was the same as the chainsword's fuel, Zaire wasn't sure. If it didn't work, he would have to rely on finding it in the simulator. His brows relaxed. Then, he seemed to remember something. He reopened Google Chrome. He went directly to Amazon and ordered a sturdy and cheap instrument case. After all, a 1.5-meter chainsword was too conspicuous. He needed basic camouflage to carry it outside. After completing everything, Zaire lay on the bed, holding the chainsword, admiring it repeatedly. Then he instinctively opened the simulator. He checked the remaining cooldown time. 118 hours left. At first glance, it seemed sufficient. But as the simulations took longer, it might not be enough. Zaire needed to replenish his firearms resources quickly and secure a stable supply channel. If the path of a gangstar didn't work, Zaire planned to follow the law. Squinting, Zaire picked up his phone. He searched for gun prices and bulk purchase conditions. However, as he browsed online, his brows furrowed again. New York City had stringent gun control laws, prohibiting firearms. Even licensed adults could only own a small-caliber handgun. Moreover, even with a gun license, if Zaire traveled to gun-friendly states, he could only legally buy one gun every 15 days. For Zaire, who consumed firearms like drinking water, this was like a drop in the bucket. Zaire clicked his tongue, jumped off the bed, and casually put down the chainsword. He pulled out some cash from under the bed and left the bedroom. Online information might not be accurate. He needed to visit gun shops in New York. Zaire told his aunt before leaving the apartment. Despite the strict gun laws, New York City had gun shops everywhere. Some stores even had licenses to sell guns. After asking a few gun shop owners, Zaire found that the online information was indeed accurate. During this period, one small shop owner told Zaire that if he was willing to pay extra, he could sell him 10 handguns. Zaire tried to ask the price. He instantly realized the shop owner saw him as a naive young guy. Zaire politely declined and returned to the streets, blending into the crowd. After half a day, after scouring nearly every gun shop, Zaire decided to give up for now. According to what Zaire had learned, adhering to the law wouldn't get him anywhere, unless he went abroad to places like Mexico or the Middle East, or started a company and secured a lucrative contract to gain the favor of arms dealers. Otherwise, there was no way to establish a channel, to quickly acquire a large number of firearms. In other words, aside from robbing an arms dealer's warehouse, the only way for Zaire to get a large supply of firearms domestically was through gangs. After all, every gang has its own smuggling routes for firearms. So, everything went back to square one. However, it wasn't all fruitless. Zaire hadn't come away empty-handed. After spending $500 to get a suitable holster for his plasma pistol, Zaire got a phone number of a private arms dealer from a gun shop owner. According to the owner's gossip, this dealer had no gang affiliations, but he wouldn't entertain deals for fewer than 100 guns to avoid misunderstandings. And being mistaken for an undercover cop, Zaire was skeptical, but he didn't refuse the shop owner's help. He decided to note down the phone number. It was a non-gang smuggling route after all. Whether it was legitimate, Zaire would have to find out himself. Walking down the street, Zaire decided to head home first. He had a lot to deal with. The restaurant's renovation needed his attention, and his aunt needed his input on the plans. The makeup exams at Midtown High were also waiting for him. "Ah, my bike." Zaire stopped in his tracks, suddenly remembering. He slapped his forehead in frustration, maybe because of his strong build and abrupt movement. The nearby pedestrians quickly stepped away, giving him a wide berth. Standing still, Zaire took a deep breath. He kept walking straight ahead. As long as he wasn't embarrassed, it was others who would be. As for his bike, given the current state of security in New York, it would definitely be gone if it had been parked outside the school for over a day. Zaire reluctantly accepted this reality. After walking another block, Zaire's eyes fell on a motorcycle shop on the side of the road. Hesitating for a moment, he decided to upgrade. He stepped into the shop, and before he could look around, a black-haired white salesman in a suit quickly approached him. "Hello, sir. What kind of vehicle are you looking for? Do you have any specific models in mind?" The salesman beamed enthusiastically. Zaire shook his head politely and said, "I don't know much about motorcycles. My only requirement is a good range." Hearing this, the salesman became even more enthusiastic. He gestured for Zaire to follow him to a display stand, pointing at a luxurious motorcycle rotating slowly. Handcrafted by master artisans, each metal part assembled by hand in a rugged style. The base model is only 50,000. "Ah, my second requirement is a lower price." As a practical person, Zaire couldn't help but twitch his mouth. He wasn't a motorcycle enthusiast. Any motorcycle to him was just a means of transportation. Besides, the world of the wealthy was still far off for the aspiring millionaire Zaire. Maybe one day he'd get a chance to fleece Stark. "Ah, no worries, let's check out this one. It's the latest spring model. The same color scheme as Iron Man's, a trend among young people, priced at 10,000, with a discount up to 10% for credit card payments in installments." Unfortunately, despite the salesman's enthusiastic pitch, Zaire took a deep breath. He now regretted entering the store. To end the ordeal quickly, Zaire squinted, quickly scanning the various motorcycles around. Then he decisively pointed to a vehicle with a rugged style. "That one. What's the price?" "Well," the salesman's smile seemed to freeze for a moment, but he maintained his professionalism. "This is a scooter, also known as a little lamb, popular among women and men with your physique. Only 5,000, but it doesn't meet your first requirement at all." The salesman smiled wryly, a hint of helplessness in his eyes. However, Zaire smiled slightly. "No problem, it's cheap. I'll take two just in case." Just in case. The salesman seemed puzzled by Zaire's words. But selling products was a good thing. When Zaire pulled out a wad of cash from his pocket, the salesman had no more complaints. After all, the customer is always right. Hell's Kitchen Baby Mall. Numerous forensic experts from the FBI, dressed in white protective suits, moved in and out of the mall's main hall. They were trying to extract more evidence from the ruins. In the overgrown parking lot, a white police car stood out among the many black vehicles. Police Captain George Stacy sat in the driver's seat, holding a cup of coffee, flipping through the files spread out on the steering wheel. As a liaison between the police and the FBI, George had basic access to the case details. 20 hours after the incident, even though the genetic testing wasn't complete, the dental records, the FBI had identified all the deceased, members of the Slavic tracksuit mafia. Except for their boss, Fat Bobby, who was missing, the rest were key gang members. Barring any surprises, the tracksuit mafia was now a part of New York's history. Sipping his coffee, George absent-mindedly flipped through the files. Then he frowned deeply. His hand trembled, almost spilling his coffee. Even though he had seen the children's bodies firsthand, seeing them again in the photos, George still couldn't bear it. As a father himself, he couldn't imagine. If his beloved daughter faced the same fate, could he still uphold the belief in justice brought by the law? The crime scene was difficult to process, but the case was straightforward. Even a rookie could see the truth. Revenge. Bloody revenge. For the slain children's bloody revenge. A vigilante who had long fought crime finally crossed the blurred line out of unbearable pain and anger. George, frowning deeply, stared at a photo of a broken club, lost in thought. The next morning, at 8 o'clock, Zaire's aunt was just about to walk out the apartment door when she found her path blocked by two brightly colored mopeds. Zaire, standing nearby and pointing to the red and yellow scooters, smiled and said, Auntie, even though your birthday is still months away, consider this an early gift. Just enjoy it. You rascal. Always wasting money. Auntie couldn't help but roll her eyes at Zaire, but the smile on her face was unmistakable. Auntie, let me show you how to ride it, Zaire offered, ready to teach her how to operate the moped. To his surprise, his aunt pushed him aside, her round chin held high. I used to be quite the biker in my younger days. Ah, those were the days, she said, hastily taking the keys from Zaire and choosing the yellow moped. With practiced ease, she started the engine, waved goodbye without looking back, and rode off. Wow, I really underestimated her, Zaire muttered, wide-eyed and amazed. He hoped that receiving this gift might make his aunt more forgiving about him getting special permission for a makeup exam. Smiling, Zaire headed upstairs to their apartment. After an hour of studying, he grew frustrated. Grabbing his chainsaw sword, he began swinging it wildly in the living room, muttering angrily, "Why do students have to learn algebra and geometry? Isn't setting up lethal traps enough? Why study performing arts? Aren't Katakan fighting techniques and Krieger battle skills good enough?" Exhausted after half an hour of wielding the chainsaw sword, Zaire dropped it and slumped onto the sofa, panting. He still hadn't found a reliable source for firearms, though the simulator could last a few more tries. However, dealing with life without a diploma was a persistent headache. As time passed, Zaire dozed off. When he awoke to the sound of the door opening, he realized it was already dark outside. He had slept the entire day. He started to get up to make dinner for his aunt, but stopped when he saw her sitting silently on the sofa, looking troubled. "Auntie, what's wrong? Did something go wrong with the restaurant renovation?" Zaire asked, concerned. "Jerry, Big Mouth Mike's missing brother, has been found," she said, her eyes red and voice choked with emotion. "Mike called me in tears, saying his brother was found, but in terrible condition. Their mother couldn't handle the shock and lost her mind. Mike resigned and apologized, so I didn't try to convince him to stay." Zaire stayed silent, his face expressionless, like a corpse. He was actually the first to know about Jerry, but couldn't tell Mike the truth due to the complicated circumstances involved. Mike said the police need to keep evidence. "So Jerry's funeral will be in 2 weeks, Auntie continued, wiping her eyes. "He thanked us for all the help over the years and hoped we could attend the funeral." Zaire nodded silently. "We should go. It's the right thing to do." "Where does Mike live?" "In Harlem, that famous minority community," Auntie sighed. Zaire frowned briefly before his expression softened. "That area has bad security. You shouldn't go alone. Mike might be nice, but that doesn't mean everyone there is." Auntie nodded. "I understand. Also, since Mike quit, we need to hire new staff for the restaurant. Zaire, you're grown up now and have your own responsibilities. I don't know much about superheroes or Captain America, but I understand you want to do good. I won't stop you." "Auntie, Zaire tried to speak, but couldn't find the words. Auntie continued, "I just want you to stay safe. No injuries, no life-threatening situations. That's all I ask." Zaire nodded firmly. After a pause, he changed the topic. "Auntie, have you thought about what kind of person to hire? Gender doesn't matter, just someone diligent and quick. They don't need to know how to cook. Prepping ingredients is easy. We'll figure it out during the interviews," Auntie replied. Zaire shrugged and chatted with her for a while before they ended the conversation. Late at night, Zaire lay on his bed, one hand on his plasma pistol, the other clutching his chainsaw sword, staring at the dark ceiling. He had researched the number of missing children in recent years. The statistics were shocking. If disabled children were being exploited for their organs, where were all the healthy ones going? Was the tracksuit gang the only group involved in such crimes? He pondered whether to alert superheroes like Iron Man or Captain America. But revealing his identity posed a risk. Especially with Hydra infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D., how could he secure firearm resources reliably? Should he risk raiding an arms dealer's warehouse or learn to make guns himself? What materials would he need for that? As he drifted into a drowsy haze, a long-ignored idea burst into his mind. I might be out of the loop, but some people are well-informed, Zaire thought, sitting up with a faint smile. Like Dear Eugene, Zaire, wearing a black baseball cap, appeared at apartment 403. He carried a neatly wrapped box under one arm. Knock, knock, knock. With his other hand, he knocked on the door. There was no response. Patiently, Zaire knocked again. Knock, knock, knock. After a moment, a cautious voice sounded from inside. Who is it? Zaire squinted slightly and said calmly, "It's me, Zaire." No sooner had he spoken than there was a hurried retreat of footsteps, quickly moving away from the door. Hearing this, Zaire sighed. Clearly, Eugene was still very uneasy about his visit. After several seconds, the footsteps approached again. The door cracked open slightly. Through the gap, a pair of cautious and slightly fearful eyes peeked out. "I haven't done anything wrong recently. I've been staying home and resting." Zaire blinked, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Eugene, I'm not here to cause trouble. I have legitimate business." However, Eugene's eyes were filled with suspicion. "Really?" Zaire's face darkened as he commanded, "Open the door." "Okay." With a clatter, the chain was removed. Eugene opened the door wide. He revealed his neck brace and the casts on his right arm and left leg. Eugene nodded repeatedly, forcing a smile as he motioned for Zaire to enter. Zaire nodded and stepped into the apartment. Before he could explain his visit, Eugene, sweating profusely, quickly said, "Zaire, I haven't told anyone a word about your business. After I found out those gangs were kidnapping children, I swore I'd never betray you. Thank you, but that's not why I'm here." Standing in place, Zaire glanced at Eugene's injuries and said. Then, he pulled out the box he had been carrying under his arm. It was a phone gift box bearing the Iron Man logo. "I'm here to give you a new phone as an apology. Do you believe me?" Not really." Eugene looked at Zaire, his face showing unease. Not wanting to get on Zaire's bad side, Eugene quickly added with a forced laugh, "Zaire, you must need my help with something, right? I know my worth and limits." However, Zaire shook his head slightly. Staring at Eugene, he sincerely said, "I was too harsh before. To apologize, I bought you a new phone with the Iron Man logo." As soon as he finished speaking, the forced smile on Eugene's face vanished. He scrutinized Zaire for a moment before shaking his head with a laugh. "I guess you really are here to apologize, but I still think you need something from me." With that, Eugene limped over to the couch and sat down slowly. Zaire raised an eyebrow and followed, sitting across from Eugene. As soon as he sat, he handed the phone box to Eugene. Eugene, frowning, took it but did not open it. Instead, he placed it on his lap, his cast pressing it down. After a moment of hesitation, Eugene asked, "Zaire, just tell me what you need. I'll do my best to help." "All right, I'll get straight to the point." Zaire nodded, squinting slightly. "Do you have a wide network of friends? Do you know people in the black market? I need information." I'm not bragging, but I know people all over New York." "Black market? What do you mean? Counterfeit money? Fake IDs? Or something else?" Eugene blinked several times, asking cautiously. Zaire didn't mince words. "I need guns, lots of them. The more, the better. If I can't get a large quantity at once, I need at least 100 per week. And since it's a long-term purchase, the price needs to be reasonable." "Officer, I'm a good guy. I'm not in a gang. I don't smuggle." But Zaire's frankness made Eugene misunderstand. Eugene raised his voice, shouting. At the same time, his eyes darted toward the door, as if expecting something. Zaire was momentarily taken aback, but quickly understood Eugene's reaction. He waved his hand, sighing. "I don't have any recording devices, and I'm not helping the police sting operations." After several explanations, Eugene's doubts were finally dispelled. He then frowned and said, "Zaire, when I got expelled, you were still in high school, right? Why do you need so many guns? That's enough to start a small war. Are you planning to become an arms dealer?" Zaire smiled slightly, remaining silent. Eugene looked at Zaire, his expression shifting. After a long hesitation, he cautiously said, "I can't make any promises, but I'll try my best. I'm just a small fry without gang ties, even though I know a lot of people." Zaire nodded, indicating his understanding. He wasn't relying solely on Eugene. It would be great if he could succeed, but if not, he'd find another way. After discussing for a while and exchanging contact information, Zaire left. As the door closed, Eugene collapsed back onto the couch. His eyes fell on the Iron Man logo on the phone box. After a long moment of brewing emotions, Eugene sighed. "It's been a long time since anyone gave me a gift." With a complex expression, Eugene pulled out an old button phone from his cast. He planned to contact his friends to gather information for Zaire. Just then, there was another knock on the door. Knock, knock, knock. Eugene was puzzled. Zaire again? Did he regret giving the phone and want it back? Muttering to himself, Eugene struggled to his feet and hobbled to the door. However, when he opened it, he found a tall stranger standing there. A Slav woman over 6 feet tall with fair skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes. She was more muscular than Eugene and exuded a mix of power and elegance. Before Eugene could ask, the woman with a cold tone asked, "Are you Eugene? I'm Sergei's mother. He's been missing for a week. Do you know where he is?" As soon as she finished, Eugene's spine tingled and cold sweat broke out on his back. Eugene's real name is Yevon. 2 days had passed, and Zaire still hadn't heard from Eugene. He wasn't worried because worrying wouldn't help. In his leisurely life, Zaire had managed to post a few job ads for his aunt. The rest of his time was devoted entirely to studying. During this period of intense focus, he hadn't even opened the simulator interface. At 2 p.m., Zaire sat at his desk, fully engrossed in his studies, preparing to tackle high school material. Ding! At that moment, Zaire's phone screen lit up with a new message. He picked it up casually. Seeing it was from Eugene, he opened it immediately. However, after a quick glance, his expression turned serious, and his eyes widened. Eugene might be in trouble. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent such a strange message. Sender: Eugene, hey, long time no see, bro. I found what you were looking for. I'm at the Battery Park Tunnel in Brooklyn, in the maintenance passage. I'll be waiting for you there. Don't be late. Not only was the greeting unusual, but Eugene also wouldn't end a message with "don't be late." This wasn't like him, especially with Zaire. Moreover, the detailed location suggested the sender was worried Zaire might not find it. Realizing this, Zaire stood up, his expression cold. This was a bait message. But if someone was using Eugene as bait, the target was definitely him. If they liked fishing, they should be ready to catch a great white shark. With a steely glint in his eyes, Zaire quickly strapped on his holster with the plasma pistol and put on a loose jacket to conceal the deadly weapon. As he was about to leave, his gaze fell on the chainsaw sword. The cold, sharp teeth glinted, almost thirsting for fresh blood. The ordered box hadn't arrived yet, so Zaire didn't hesitate. He grabbed a gray sheet, wrapped it around the 1.5-meter-long chainsaw sword, and tucked it under his arm. He then put on a black baseball cap and mask and stepped out the door. Brooklyn. In the middle of a bustling tunnel, Zaire parked his motorcycle at the side and stood at the entrance of the maintenance passage, scanning his surroundings. He noticed a long, rusty chain had been broken and discarded on the ground. The open, dark passage exuded a cold, eerie air that brushed against his face. Zaire gripped the handle of the chainsaw sword and unzipped his jacket for easy access to his plasma pistol. He then walked into the passage, his expression unchanged. After a few steps, he paused to let his eyes adjust to the light. He squinted, taking in the environment. The passage was about 3 meters high and 2 meters wide, stretching out in a straight line. Every few meters, dim emergency lights illuminated the way, leading into the dark depths. Zaire, his face stern, tore off the sheet from the chainsaw sword and discarded it on the damp ground. He gripped the sword with one hand and proceeded steadily. After about 20 meters, he reached the only turn in the passage. Listening carefully, he then turned the corner. As he did, a fist-sized rock suddenly shot out from the shadows deeper in the tunnel. Zaire's eyes narrowed as he instinctively raised the chainsaw sword to block it. Bang! The rock collided with the metal, ricocheting off the ceiling before falling to the ground. At that moment, a tall, muscular woman over 1.9 meters emerged from the shadows, her body covered in silver metal armor. Good reflexes, but that's all they are. The blonde woman's tone was a mix of praise and mockery. "Are you Zaire?" she asked coldly, her voice devoid of emotion. Zaire remained silent, his eyes scanning her tall frame, the full-body silver armor, and her Slavic features. He took a deep breath and said slowly, "I'm just an ordinary person who loves life. Are you the real leader of the tracksuit mafia?" Huh. The woman's body swayed slightly as she let out a cold laugh, her eyes full of disdain. "I'm not interested in your personal grudges. I'll ask once, where is Sergei?" "Ah, I understand now." Zaire sighed, his tone suddenly melancholic. "It is a personal grudge." In an instant, Zaire switched the chainsaw sword to his left hand, his right hand hanging slightly, fingers twitching. The woman misunderstood his action, or perhaps she had too much faith in her armor's defense. She glanced at the chainsaw sword and said mockingly, "Young man, times have changed. A mere melee weapon won't bring you any comfort." She raised her silver-clad hand, her fingers curling into a fist. This is the age of technology, the age of intelligence. Do you think only Tony Stark has advanced armor? Too naive. A fanatical smile appeared on the woman's face as she swung her arm, the armor making a mechanical grinding noise. This was a powerful piece of technology. Taking a deep breath, she asked again, one last time, "Where is Sergei?" But Zaire suddenly smiled, his gaze sincere as he said, "Times have changed?" Indeed, they have. Before she could react, Zaire drew his plasma pistol like lightning and pulled the trigger. American breathing, first form gun draw technique. Bang, bang, bang. A series of blue plasma balls, each the size of a human head, shot out, flooding the tunnel with scorching energy. In an instant, the blinding plasma filled the passage like a ferocious flood. Without hesitation, Zaire released the plasma pistol, letting it drop as his muscles bulged and he charged forward, following the wave of plasma. He gripped the chainsaw sword with both hands and activated the motor. Vroom, vroom, vroom. The chainsaw sword roared to life, echoing through the tunnel. The searing plasma approached its target, expanding in volume as it almost filled the entire corridor. The edges of the plasma storm even melted parts of the walls, causing drops of dark red lava to fall. At this moment, even though the plasma was not yet close, the extreme heat distorting the air had already arrived. The fair-skinned woman with blonde hair had her skin crack and her hair catch fire within moments. Her previously arrogant demeanor was replaced by shock and fear. Plasma weapon? In a life-or-death situation, the blonde-haired woman stomped hard on the ground, propelling herself backward in an attempt to evade using the powerful propulsion of her silver armor. Unfortunately, the terrifying plasma spread like a tidal wave, far outpacing human reflexes. In an instant, one of her feet and part of her lower leg were vaporized. Even her proud silver armor could not withstand the plasma's million-degree heat. She barely had time to feel the pain and could only struggle desperately with her survival instincts. As she began to fall, she used her remaining foot to stomp the ground again, desperately trying to evade. Just then, cobalt blue plasma orbs exploded, instantly melting the corridor's floor and walls and forming a small pool of dark red lava. Boom, boom, boom. Before the twisted air's heat dissipated completely, a tall figure wielding a chainsaw sword leaped over the lava pool. His shoes started to melt and burn, and even his clothes emitted wisps of smoke. The chainsaw sword, tilted at an angle, scraped the corridor's ceiling, leaving deep grooves. In this moment, Zaire, with a ferocious expression, resembled a terrifying demon emerging from a burning hell. The blonde-haired woman's once pale and delicate features were now destroyed, leaving only cracked, bloodied flesh. Her blonde hair had vanished, leaving behind only blisters and ruptures. One of her eyes seemed to have been seared blind by the intense heat, with her remaining eye filled with endless pain and despair. Roar! With a thunderous roar echoing through the corridor, Zaire swung the roaring chainsaw sword down onto the remaining foot of the blonde-haired woman, who was barely hanging on. The chainsaw sword sliced through with a cacophony of grinding sounds. The teeth of the single-molecule blades spun rapidly, cutting through both the so-called high-tech armor and the woman's flesh and bones with ease. Blood sprayed out instantly, splattering onto Zaire. Overcome by her severe injuries, the blonde-haired woman let out a tragic scream, momentarily regaining her senses. She instinctively raised her arms to retaliate, but Zaire, with a fierce glare, gave her no chance. Amidst the blood splatter, Zaire used the roaring chainsaw sword to cut the blonde-haired woman's massive body in half. The still roaring chainsaw sword, with its spinning teeth, jammed into the floor. Thud thud. The gory remains of the woman's organs spilled out, accompanied by the sound of her body hitting the ground. Phew, Zaire, taking a deep breath, pulled the chainsaw sword out of the ground. He noticed the stinging pain in his feet, looked down to see that his shoes had nearly burned away, and his feet were reddened and blistered from the heat. Hiss! Zaire winced as he removed his still-hot shoes and stood barefoot on the warm ground. Sometimes, being too immersed in battle wasn't ideal. He squinted, shaking his head in resignation. After about 5 minutes, the pain in his feet gradually subsided. Leaning on the chainsaw sword, he glanced at the lava pool's dark red heat and the plasma gun lying on the opposite side, as well as the messy remains of the woman's body. Zaire decided to deal with these matters later. He turned and walked deeper into the corridor. The blonde-haired woman was dead, but Eugene's fate still needed to be determined. At the end of the corridor was a small room for storing tools and equipment, now empty except for a dim emergency light in one corner. Under the dim light, a tall man, completely stripped of clothes and chained by iron cuffs to a pipe, lay curled up on the damp, water-stained floor. Eugene was lying beneath a dripping faucet, with water droplets continuously falling on his pale face. His eyes were tightly closed, unresponsive, seemingly suffering from a painful water torture and mental abuse. Zaire quickly approached and, after confirming Eugene's chest was still rising and falling, swung the chainsaw sword to sever the chains binding Eugene's wrists. Eugene collapsed onto the floor like a discarded rag doll, still unconscious. Zaire dragged Eugene aside with one hand and checked him carefully, confirming he was in a deep coma and needed medical assistance. This was beyond his capability to help. Zaire glanced at the blood spattered on him and the still dripping faucet. He took off his bloodied clothes and began to clean the blood from the area, his gaze falling on Eugene's scattered clothes nearby. About an hour later, the lava pool had cooled, and Zaire successfully recovered the machine's soul displeased plasma gun. He had intended to salvage the blonde-haired woman's silver armor, but found it completely damaged and worthless. Feeling a loss of a fortune, Zaire expressionlessly placed the bloodied clothes to be destroyed near the corpse. He retrieved the plasma gun and fired it, covering the body and everything around it in plasma. Once the body was confirmed destroyed, Zaire, carrying the still unconscious Eugene in his underwear, walked out of the corridor. The traffic outside was still busy. Zaire picked up the previously discarded sheet and wrapped the chainsaw sword in it. He then patiently waited, occasionally checking Eugene's condition. As the sky grew darker and traffic lessened, Zaire disguised Eugene as a drunken friend and took him to a public phone booth with a motorcycle. He called for an ambulance, and upon hearing the siren, Zaire, with the chainsaw sword under his arm, rode off into the distance. When Zaire returned home, it felt as if he had just finished a simple task. In a way, it was simple, just sawing someone open. Unfortunately, Eugene's unexpected ordeal and coma disrupted Zaire's resource replenishment plan once again. Zaire decided to try the private gun dealer's number he had previously obtained, hoping to establish a basic connection. However, before he could act, an unexpected call came early the next morning. He was about to head to the restaurant with his aunt when he received a call from an unfamiliar number. Frowning, Zaire answered the call and was surprised to learn that Eugene had woken up from his deep coma and contacted him using a nurse's phone. After a moment's hesitation, Zaire decided to bring some cash and visit Eugene at the hospital. After all, Eugene was a friend who had helped him gather information. At Brooklyn Hospital, Zaire inquired at the emergency reception desk, and a duty nurse directed him to Eugene's room, advising him not to stay too long as Eugene needed rest. Just as Zaire was about to turn away, he overheard a nurse gossiping about a man who had woken from a coma last night, only to break down and cry for hours like a traumatized child. Zaire couldn't help but raise an eyebrow, realizing that Eugene had indeed suffered greatly. When Zaire entered Eugene's room, he was surprised to see Eugene sitting up straight in bed with a neck brace. Although Eugene's overall demeanor was weary, his eyes were brighter than before. "Hey, Zaire," Eugene greeted with a bright smile and a wave, showing an unusual enthusiasm. Do you need me to call a doctor?" Zaire asked, squinting at Eugene's drastically changed behavior. "It's okay, Zaire," Eugene replied with a radiant smile. "I've changed inside and out, but I think it's for the better." Eugene explained that while he couldn't remember everything that had happened, he knew Zaire had likely saved him. To repay the favor, Eugene had used his contacts to find someone who could help Zaire, Aaron Davis in Queens. Eugene handed Zaire a note with Aaron's contact information, saying he had already introduced them, and that Zaire would need to negotiate the details. After scrutinizing Eugene for a moment, Zaire accepted the note and pocketed it. He then took out some cash to give to Eugene, but Eugene refused, expressing a desire to be a genuinely good person from now on. Zaire, after a moment's thought, put the cash away and smiled faintly. "Eugene, I hope you succeed in becoming a good person." As Zaire turned to leave, he paused at the door and advised Eugene to avoid working in Manhattan for at least a year, suggesting Brooklyn and Queens as alternatives. Eugene, left in a daze, watched Zaire leave. After leaving the hospital, Zaire settled Eugene's bill and left his contact information. Once outside, he sighed, realizing Eugene might have psychological issues from his extreme fear and pain. Still, it was hard to judge if these changes were ultimately good or bad for Eugene. Sitting on his scooter, Zaire called Aaron Davis. After a brief conversation, they arranged their first transaction in 3 days. Zaire opted for the cheaper used guns, which were former crime weapons, ensuring the simulator would not miss any operable firearm. With his resource issue resolved, Zaire felt a surge of excitement. He glanced at the hospital one last time before riding off. Later that night, after finishing everything, he eagerly started the long-awaited simulator. Simulation starting. Current identities. Katakan Recruit, Krieger Grenadier. Please choose an identity for deployment. If you refuse, a random identity will be chosen. Identity choice refused. Simulation starting. You have been deployed to the Warhammer universe. Time: 10:24.m41. Location: Galaxy Unknown Sector, Lorne V. You find yourself on the planet's surface. Surrounded by a frozen wasteland, you are enveloped in countless snowflakes. You don't have time to feel the bone-chilling cold. You hear the familiar roar of a bolt gun and the desperate cries of lost guns. Looking towards the sound, you see a towering 2.5-meter Chaos Space Marine, covered in blood-red power armor adorned with horns and skulls, tearing a mortal soldier apart amid a hail of bullets and blood. You didn't have time to curse. The cornate berserker with bunny ears on his blood-red helmet had already locked onto you using his auspex. You tried to pull your legs out of the knee-deep snow, preparing to fight back. The roaring cornate berserker dropped the corpse he was holding and raised his terrifying chain axe, charging towards you. You grabbed a fallen lost gun and frantically pulled the trigger. The searing laser, capable of obliterating flesh, only created small dents in the berserker's power armor. He was now less than 5 meters away from you. The roaring of the chain axe's teeth reverberated in your eardrums, and the stench of blood filled your nostrils. Despair consumed you. You held down the trigger, trying to overload the last gun's battery, hoping to cause some damage before your imminent death. Regret washed over you for not praying to the Emperor before your descent, seeking his protection. You were about to be torn apart, teetering on the brink of death. At the last moment, an orange-red melt-a-blast melted a swath of snow and penetrated the cornate berserker's power pack, causing a violent explosion. The roaring chain axe stopped half a meter from you. You were blown away by the shockwave, bleeding from your mouth and nose, your head spinning, on the verge of unconsciousness. Before your eyes closed, you vaguely saw elite soldiers with enclosed helmets standing up from the snow 10 meters away. Each held a powerful hellgun and executed the still-roaring cornate berserker, hitting his bunny ears, helmet repeatedly until his head was completely vaporized. You slipped into darkness and lost consciousness. You fell into unconsciousness, lost in the dark. You were severely injured but managed to survive. As you slowly regained consciousness, the pain in your internal organs had vanished. You tried to rise, but a rough voice stopped you. Turning your head, you saw a bearded man in carapace armor, assembling and repairing a hellgun. He was chewing on his rations, crumbs scattering into his thick brown beard. You thanked him for saving you and reaffirmed your loyalty to the Emperor. Without looking up, the bearded man swallowed his food and said that it was your courage that saved you. To stand firm against a Chaos Space Marine and fire was proof enough of your devotion. You wanted to continue the conversation, but before you could speak, a still warm ration pack was tossed into your lap. Your hunger overcame you, and you ate quickly without time for gratitude. The bearded man paused his work, watching you devour your meal, and then gave you 2 choices. You could return to the Imperial outpost. The Cadian 411th Shock Troopers would welcome you, and the Inquisition would offer their friendly greetings. Or, you could accept orders from General Stuarn and join them on a perilous mission, from which there might be no return. Death was a daily occurrence. The Khorne Berserker was just an appetizer, while the green-skinned orcs would be your partners in the dance of death. And in the shadows, the lurking Eldar would be there to haunt your dreams, if you survived long enough to sleep. Without hesitation, you chose the mission. The bearded man frowned and asked why you made such a choice. The Inquisition's threats didn't sway you, and the Cadian shock troopers could guarantee your safety. You vaguely recounted your past battles. When you mentioned you had once served in the Death Corps of Krieg and the Valhallan Ice Warriors, the skepticism in his eyes shifted to astonishment. The bearded man believed your words and came to see you as an emissary of the Emperor. You did not deny his belief, merely meeting his fiery gaze. On the first day, you followed the bearded man and met the rest of the team. It was a 6-man squad. The bearded man was a sergeant and the leader of the squad. You were given several blood-stained Cadian standard-issue camouflage uniforms, remnants of those who had offered their lives in service. Without hesitation, you donned the uniforms, grateful for any warmth against the biting cold. From the sergeant, you received a loss gun and 3 frag grenades. You asked for more weapons. The rest of the squad chuckled quietly, and the sergeant had to explain. Time was short, and by joining the squad, you had taken on the role of the pack soldier, carrying extra equipment as part of your duty. You did not hesitate to accept this role. You considered yourself merely a coin in the Emperor's hand, unworthy of any special treatment. On the second day, the squad encountered a horde of orcs. They belonged to the infamous Goth clan, a brutal mob of massive orcs, far larger and stronger than the average. Despite the surprise attack, the squad demonstrated impeccable teamwork and discipline, making quick work of the orcs. Lying in the snow, you hadn't even had time to unload your gear before the battle was over. As the squad cleared the battlefield, you couldn't help but ask about their true origins. The sergeant remained silent, but a younger squad member spoke up with pride. They were the elite of the Cadian shock troopers, the pride of Cadia. They were Khazarkan. On the third day, heavy snowfall obscured the world, and the squad continued safely. The journey was grueling, and the weight of the gear left you utterly exhausted. The squad members offered to help you carry the load, but you refused. You believed they needed to conserve their strength for the coming dangers. Over time, you discovered that you could heal from fatigue and injuries by sleeping. Surely a blessing from the Emperor. During a break, the sergeant entered your snow trench and revealed the true nature of the mission. A short time ago, the Emperor-class Titan Dominatus had fallen on this planet. This was one of the Imperium's most powerful weapons, and a sacred relic of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Its loss was unacceptable. The Khazarkan squad you had joined was just one of many teams sent to recover it. More Imperial forces were on their way. You had proven your loyalty through days of grueling action. The sergeant advised you to prepare yourself mentally. An unimaginable battle awaited. In the first week, you adapted to the freezing environment thanks to your exceptional resilience. You began to ask the sergeant and the others about Khazarkan battle tactics and field experience. The squad members exchanged glances, clearly impressed by your stamina and endurance. You gradually learned the strategies for killing Chaos Space Marines and orcs. For example, when facing Khorne berserkers, melt their heads off. Against a mob of orcs, take out their leaders first. In the second week, the squad reached a vast forest covered in snow. Imperial intelligence indicated that you were close to the location where the Emperor-class Titan Dominatus had fallen. The sergeant ordered everyone to be on high alert and replenish their strength and ammo. You unloaded the equipment, carefully rationing supplies to distribute among the squad. Suddenly, you heard a faint whistling sound. Sharp, crystalline projectiles embedded themselves into the supply crates before you, destroying most of the provisions. You instantly recognized them as ammunition from an Eldari shuriken catapult. Ambush, you yelled at the top of your lungs. The elite Khazarkan squad reacted even faster than you did. Your warning had barely left your mouth when the sergeant's hellgun erupted in a ferocious roar. Blazing lasers spewed forth, slicing through the surrounding forest. The other squad members scattered into positions, their melta guns and laser fire illuminating the snow-covered ground. In the forest ahead, a tall, slender white figure, 2 meters in height, leapt from the shadows, dodging the hail of bullets. You tried to aim and shoot with your laser gun, but found it impossible to lock onto the agile and nimble figure. You reached for a few fragmentation grenades, planning to use their wide blast radius to stop the target. You pulled the safety pin but had not yet thrown them. Suddenly, the slender figure spoke a few words in a halting, obscure Imperial dialect, raising a hand and signaling for a ceasefire. The sergeant ignored the call to ceasefire and signaled the rest of the squad to stay alert for more heretics. The slender figure, wearing a long helmet, had no choice but to keep dodging the laser beams while stumbling over Imperial speech. The figure explained that the destruction of supplies was a personal mistake. It came from the Eldar, under orders from the seer Taldir, to warn the Imperial allies. An alliance between the Orc warlord Gorgitz and the Chaos Lord Kroll was forming, posing a significant threat to Imperial forces. A massive wave of Orc warriors, allied with Khorne berserkers, was headed towards the location of the Emperor-class Titan Dominatus. Your squad needed assistance from the Eldar. The sergeant scoffed at this, and the Hellgun roared even more frequently. You took the opportunity to throw a few fragmentation grenades, but the slender white figure used the explosion's shockwave to leap behind tall trees and disappear from sight. The sergeant stopped firing and, instead of reprimanding you for acting rashly, praised your potential as an expert grenadier. In the third week, your squad finally reached the Emperor-class Titan Dominatus. You looked up in awe, marveling at its towering, mountain-like grandeur and its formidable firepower. Your squad joined other arriving rescue teams and received additional supplies. Through exchanges, the sergeant learned that other squads had also encountered warnings from the Eldar. Squads that mistook the Eldar for allies suffered significant losses. In addition to losing equipment, some squads even lost soldiers' lives. After a brief rest, you received a gift from the sergeant. It was a set of carapace armor from another Khazarkan squad, greatly enhancing your battlefield survivability. You didn't have time to express your gratitude as the roar of laser and Hellgun fire echoed all around. The forest's edge teemed with orcs, and the even more terrifying Khorne berserkers revealed their towering forms. The battle to defend Dominatus had erupted. In the fourth week, due to the lack of tech priests for maintenance and appeasement, the Emperor-class Titan, suffering from machine spirit discontent, couldn't activate its void shields. Only the Hell Cannon and Laser Blaster mounted on the platform were operational. A larger plasma annihilator cannon vaporized a squad of Khorne berserkers before going into standby mode, unable to fire again, to prevent irreparable damage to the Titan Dominatus. All support teams had to face the surging Orc horde head-on, maintaining a battle line. Your squad was a critical part of this defense line. Many Khorne berserkers among the Orcs seemed to fixate on you as their ultimate target. Every berserker that spotted you would let out a guttural roar, seemingly forgetting the prominent Titan in the distance, and charged at you with their rabbit ears waving. After surviving one terrifying encounter, you gradually regained your composure and formulated a plan with the sergeant. Your squad would exploit your unusual attraction to the Khorne berserkers. You would lead them to disrupt the Orc formations away from the Imperial line and then eliminate them. From then on, the battlefield saw a strange scene. Whenever a Khorne berserker appeared, you would bravely jump out from the line, throwing grenades or firing to attract their attention. Each berserker would charge at you, smashing through countless Orcs in the process. Your squad would then precisely target the berserkers' heads or power packs with melta and laser fire, causing violent explosions that took out numerous Orcs. Drenched in sweat, you would calmly return to the Imperial line, reload, and wait for the next opportunity. By the sixth week, your squad was growing numb and exhausted, leading to some mistakes in the plan. One severely wounded berserker broke through the Imperial line. It caused heavy casualties and finally confronted you. This time, you clearly heard its guttural snarl. Traitor! It called you, with its helmet shattered and brain matter oozing out. You raised your Hellgun and shot it through the head. You were puzzled by this. There was no time to ponder as countless Orcs broke through the line and charged at you. In the seventh week, the Imperial rescue teams suffered heavy losses and had to retreat onto the Emperor-class Titan Dominatus, relying on the remaining weapons on the platform to resist. Only 3 members of your squad, including yourself, survived. The sergeant had lost half an arm to the Orcs but continued to fight tenaciously. You instinctively tallied the remaining supplies for all squads. You discovered that the entire rescue force was about to run out of ammunition and food. You tried to contact the Imperial outpost for more support. You received a deeply sorrowful reply from General Stern. The Eldar heretics had once again broken the brief alliance and launched a frenzied attack on the Imperial outpost. The Cadian strike group had no more troops to send. He prayed for the Emperor to protect you. You ended the communication, falling into silence. You picked up your Hellgun again, planning to detonate the Emperor-class Titan Dominatus. If Dominatus cannot belong to the Emperor, then no one shall have it, you muttered coldly to yourself. The ground battle was even more brutal, and your time was running out. You crawled into the narrow, dark maintenance tunnels of the Emperor-class Titan, entering the engine area. You needed to detonate the critical core, the plasma reactor, before the heretics breached the Titan. You brushed past several wetware servitors. Silent and lifeless, they had already embraced the Omniscia, the machine god. Sensing a subtle threat, you swiftly turned and tried to pull the trigger. Sharp crystals from a shuriken catapult shot out from the servitor's shadows, embedding deeply into the left side of your body. Enduring excruciating pain, you managed to fire your hellgun. The searing laser tore through numerous servitors, revealing a slender figure in white armor in the shadows. An Eldar, the pointed-eared heretic, had somehow infiltrated the critical area of the Titan Dominatus. Dragging your severely injured body, you barely managed to retreat, losing a significant amount of blood. You were 10 meters away from the plasma reactor chamber. The roar of your hellgun kept the enemy at bay, while sharp crystals occasionally grazed your scalp. Fearless, you were focused solely on your mission. With 5 meters to go, your hellgun was about to overload. With a blood-soaked hand, you pulled out a fragmentation grenade, removed the pin, and threw it at the enemy. Using the explosion's light and shockwave as cover, you dragged your injured body into the plasma reactor chamber. You began to feel dizzy and had difficulty breathing. You were losing too much blood. Leaning weakly against the plasma reactor, you sat down. You pulled the pins from all your grenades, aiming your hellgun at the entrance. You silently apologized to the sergeant and the squad members. You were on the brink of death due to blood loss. You released the grenades, and the hellgun roared once more, on the verge of overloading. Through your blurred vision, you saw the nimble movements of the Eldar heretic, a hint of mockery on your lips. Boom! You uttered your final word. You were engulfed by the searing explosion, the shockwave and flames creating a grand, glorious symphony. You were utterly vaporized. You are dead. This simulation has ended, lasting 49 days. You have earned the following options to keep. 1. Emperor-class Titan Dominatus, full operating manual. 2. Standard Imperial Infantry ration pack, 1 week. 3. Kazarkan Sergeant's combat experience, 1 month. This simulation exceeded 24 hours, simulator wear and tear not exempted. Cooldown time, 49 hours. Available cooldown time, 118 hours. Would you like to use cooldown time? Cooldown time not used. Simulator will enter natural cooldown, can be bypassed at any time. Lying on the bed, Zaire ended the simulation. His heart skipped a beat when his eyes fell on the first reward, when he realized it was just the operating manual for the Emperor-class Titan Dominatus. He breathed a sigh of relief. His head sank back into the soft pillow. Zaire knew the simulator wouldn't be so generous. His gaze fell on the third reward. A faint smile appeared in his eyes. Without hesitation, Zaire chose the month-long combat experience of the Kazarkan Sergeant. In an instant, lying on the bed, Zaire seemed to enter an unfamiliar godlike perspective. It was the valuable life of the bearded sergeant, filled with training and combat. In a moment, Zaire relived the Kazarkan's training and battles. Instantly, the bones and muscles of the closed-eyed Zaire began to undergo intense changes. His skeletal structure accelerated growth, akin to forged steel. Muscles broke down and rebuilt, resembling taut, rising rock. Even his skin became tighter and more robust. Ordinary cold weapons seemed to lose their threat. When the transformation was complete, Zaire's height reached 1.96 meters. He weighed over 100 kilograms. Zaire, brimming with boundless strength, was no longer sleepy. With a slight effort in his waist and abdomen, he bounced off the bed. He landed agilely and lightly on the ground. At this moment, Zaire was fully convinced. His strength and stamina had surpassed Captain America. He had transcended the limits of human potential. With an excited expression, Zaire grasped the bed frame with his hands. Without much effort in his arms, he easily lifted the entire wooden bed. Thunk! The heavy bed landed with a collision sound. Zaire's excitement gradually faded. He glanced around his bedroom and shook his head slightly. He needed to find a real secret base. Living at home was no longer convenient for his activities. The basement was too small and could only be used temporarily. But real estate on Manhattan Island was incredibly expensive. Other places were cheaper, but far away. Moreover, his remaining funds, over $2 million, were earmarked for simulator resources and daily expenses. There wasn't much wiggle room left. Zaire frowned, then remembered something. He sat back on the bed and started searching on his phone. Soon, a faint smile appeared on Zaire's face. New York was a century-old city, with an extensive network of underground tunnels. If he picked the right location, Zaire wouldn't have to spend a dime. He could freely use the city's municipal subway and sewer tunnels. Having made up his mind, Zaire decided to use his free time before acquiring firearms to thoroughly study New York's various maps and building plans, finding a suitable underground secret base. After closing Google, still wide awake, Zaire lay back on the bed, scrolling through his phone to pass the time. Several news articles caught his attention. The top Twitter trending topic was Iron Man Tony Stark's latest heroic deed in the Middle East, killing terrorists and saving civilians. Zaire kept scrolling. Another news about frequent thunderstorms in New Mexico piqued his interest. Thor is coming. Zaire squinted, his brow furrowed. A glimmer of light flickered in his eyes. If I tried to lift Mjolnir, I wonder if I could. Odin might send the Bifrost to crush me, right? Dr. Guillotine, master of saws, Killer Zaire couldn't help but daydream. Zaire was preparing to build a secret base, but once again underestimated the complexity of New York City's century-old infrastructure. The information available online only provided partial and simplified details of the underground tunnels. Even finding complete blueprints proved challenging. To obtain more detailed maps, Zaire needed to visit the New York City Library in person. Determined to continue his search, Zaire headed to the library. He disguised himself as a college architecture student working on his thesis, which quickly earned him the enthusiastic assistance of a librarian. This librarian was a lively, attractive young woman with braided hair, freckles, and an unusually voluptuous figure. From the moment Zaire entered, she warmly grabbed his muscular arm, peppering him with questions. Once she understood his purpose, she even personally led him to the library's basement. Zaire, unfamiliar with such situations, felt awkward and unsure of how to react. The girl's seductive glances occasionally roved over his muscular frame, her demeanor reminiscent of a succubus who seemed ready to devour him. Zaire maintained a stoic expression, trying to prevent her from getting too familiar. Handling affection from the opposite sex was not his forte. Slaying heretics and fighting chaos were more within his comfort zone. Fortunately, Felicia, the librarian, didn't bother him much beyond that. After helping him find the location he needed, she tentatively asked for his phone number. Zaire hesitated for a moment, but then gave her his Twitter handle instead, maintaining the delicate balance of a teenage girl's fragile emotions. Despite his intimidating presence, Zaire was actually a gentle and sensitive young man at heart. However, after bidding the girl goodbye and entering the basement, he found himself staring at a massive stack of neatly organized blueprints. With a groan, he muttered, "I hate data on blueprints the most." Hours later, after painstakingly sifting through the piles, Zaire finally unearthed some maps from the 1990s. He realized that finding more recent blueprints would take even more time. Still full of energy, Zaire sighed as a thought popped into his mind. Should he perhaps sacrifice a bit of his dignity and invite Felicia to a candlelit dinner to win her over and get some help? Queens, New York. Riding his beloved scooter through the bustling streets of Queens, Zaire felt the spring breeze on his face. He was on his way to a predetermined, discreet location for his first legal gun deal. The location had been chosen by Aaron Davis, whose cautiousness Zaire respected rather than resented. Before leaving home, Zaire had taken his plasma pistol, which had been blessed through traditional rituals, as a precaution. Although he could crush a man's bones with one hand, Zaire preferred not to leave behind gruesome, twisted corpses. A clean vaporization with a single shot seemed far more humane. Zaire parked his scooter a block away from the meeting spot. As he locked his bike and stood up, a young boy shopping with his mother spotted him. The boy's face lit up with excitement, and he exclaimed loudly, "Wow, mister, you're so tall. Aunt May, Aunt May. I want to be a giant like him when I grow up." "Sorry about that, sir," the boy's black-haired aunt said with an apologetic smile as she caught Zaire's eye. Zaire nodded slightly to show he didn't mind, and then smiled at the boy. "Hey kid, if you want to grow big and strong, you need to eat well, exercise, and listen to your teachers, okay?" After finishing his advice, Zaire nodded again to the woman and walked away. The woman, curious, watched his broad back as he walked off before turning to the boy. "Peter, did you hear that? You won't grow big if you're picky about food." The boy's face scrunched up in response. "But Aunt May, your cooking is really..." "Peter Parker, what did you just say?" "Oh, I mean your cooking is the best, Aunt May." I'm not picky at all. I'm going to be a giant. The talkative boy and his aunt continued down the street until they disappeared from view. Meanwhile, Zaire, after carefully confirming his surroundings, finally located the abandoned shop called Haunt, which had been chosen as the meeting place. He scanned the area before stepping up to knock on the shuttered door. The rhythm of his knocks varied in length. Ding! Zaire's phone buzzed with a new message. Back door. Raising an eyebrow, Zaire headed around to the back of the shop. Before he could knock, the rusty metal door creaked open, revealing a young black man with a cautious gaze. After scanning Zaire and the surroundings, the man nodded, gesturing for Zaire to enter. Inside, the dim light filtered through, revealing wooden crates stacked on the floor, filled with guns that gleamed with a cold, metallic sheen. "You're alone?" Zaire asked, narrowing his eyes at Aaron Davis. "Aren't you worried I might double-cross you?" Aaron's calm demeanor and the rhythmic flow of his speech carried a certain lyrical cadence as he replied. "First of all, this is just a small deal introduced by Eugene, not worth the trouble. Secondly, I'm a law-abiding businessman. These are just cheap gang guns I've bought. I'm not involved in any criminal activities, so even if you were a cop, I wouldn't care." "I like your honesty," Zaire said with a nod and a smile. He pulled out 3 thick stacks of cash and handed them to Aaron. Aaron frowned slightly, eyeing Zaire. "There are only 200 guns here, priced at $100 each. 20,000 is enough. The extra is a deposit to build trust," Zaire said, still smiling. "I told you this is a long-term deal. The more guns, the better." Aaron nodded, accepting the cash. Just as he was about to leave, he turned back to ask, "Need me to arrange transport?" "No charge." "No need, my people will take care of it," Zaire replied, shaking his head. In reality, not a single gun would escape the voracious appetite of his simulator. After Aaron left, Zaire waited a bit longer, making sure everything was clear. Then, with a satisfied grin, he rubbed his hands together and began extracting the resources. Hazardous materials detected, guns, 1 hour each. Hazardous materials detected, guns, 1 hour each. By the time Zaire had finished extracting all the guns, his cooldown time had exceeded 318 hours for the first time. An indescribable sense of satisfaction, he murmured to himself. But just as he was basking in his triumph, his simulator suddenly began to change. Resource time has exceeded 300 hours. New feature unlocked in the simulator. Initializing. Resource time has exceeded 300 hours. New feature unlocked in the simulator. Initializing. Space wreck, salvage note. A space wreck is a massive amalgamation of countless derelict warships and other debris. They have drifted through the vastness of space, and even the warp for tens of thousands of years. Any force that attempts to investigate them suffers significant losses. However, beneath these layers of danger lie countless forgotten treasures, some of which are terrifying creations capable of annihilating entire planets or even star systems. Current salvage attempts, 0. Remaining salvage attempts, 0. Would you like to spend cooldown time to obtain salvage attempts? 1 hour equals 1 salvage attempt. Zaire furrowed his brow. After scanning the new feature description in the simulator, he fell into silence. Was the simulator suggesting he wasn't consuming resources quickly enough and trying to cash in on him? This was exactly like the predatory gotcha mechanics in mobile games. Zaire was almost certain that the simulator's new feature didn't even have a guaranteed reward system. If he had resources to spare in the future, he might consider trying it out. But for now, no way. Why waste cooldown time on this when he could use it for simulations instead? Despite his reservations, Zaire decided to spend 1 hour to exchange for a single salvage attempt, just to show some support for the simulator and perhaps avoid displeasing the machine's spirit. Current salvage attempts. 1. Salvage completion countdown. 59 minutes 59 seconds. All right then. Zaire couldn't help but click his tongue and shake his head in resignation. Finding out that salvage also took time only made him less interested in the new feature. Feeling somewhat disenchanted, Zaire left the abandoned shop. With his resource channel temporarily secured, he planned to resume his quest to build a secret base. However, just as he was leaving Queens and heading to the library, he received a call from his aunt. The job ad they had posted a few days ago had caught some attention, and there was a potential applicant who needed an interview. Half an hour later, Zaire arrived at the restaurant. Upon entering, he saw a young man in his early 20s sitting and chatting with his aunt. Zaire approached, and before he could say a word, his aunt stood up with a smile and introduced the young man. Zaire, this is Carl, a student. He's looking to earn some extra money while studying to ease the burden on his family. He saw our job posting and came in to inquire. Carl, a tall, slender young man with a student-like demeanor, wore rimless glasses. As Zaire approached, he quickly stood up and greeted him. Hello. Zaire nodded and smiled back, then asked the young man, Columbia University? NYU? Or New York Institute of Technology? Carl replied with a shy smile. Zaire nodded again, turning his gaze to his smiling aunt. Auntie, did you discuss the pay and other details with him? His aunt, clearly in a good mood today, quickly nodded. We just talked about it. But Carl is still a student, so he can only work part-time. I'll try to squeeze my rest and study time to make room for work, Carl said earnestly, seemingly eager for the job. It was clear he had recognized Zaire as the one who made the decisions. That won't be necessary. You're here to study, not just to work. Zaire waved his hand, smiling as he continued. You'll work 3 hours a day, 1.5 hours during lunch and dinner. If you want to work during holidays, we'll count it as full-time and pay you overtime. How does that sound? Carl lowered his head slightly, as if calculating how much he could earn. That's great. I'm very satisfied. Thank you, he said, lifting his head and giving a small bow of gratitude to both Zaire and his aunt. Zaire appreciated polite people, and he found himself growing more fond of the young man. After exchanging a glance with his aunt, Zaire nodded and said, It's settled then. Welcome to Delicious, our restaurant. We haven't opened yet, so it might be a few days before things get busy. If you have time, you can come by to get familiar with the place. Don't worry, my aunt will make sure you get paid. Both parties were pleased with the arrangement. Zaire's aunt had a new helping hand, and Zaire could focus more on his own affairs. After exchanging contact information, Carl mentioned that he planned to return the next morning, since there was nothing urgent to do at the restaurant. Zaire didn't mind and agreed readily. Once Carl left, Zaire felt no pressing need to head to the library. He spent some time chatting with his aunt while keeping an eye on the simulator, watching the salvage countdown tick down. He was curious to see what the new feature would yield. Carl walked briskly through the streets, his face occasionally showing traces of joy and relief. He sometimes paused to glance at items displayed in shop windows or to observe the men and women passing by, just like any other curious newcomer to the city. Half an hour later, Carl entered a supermarket. When he re-emerged, he was carrying a bag of snacks and drinks, along with a disposable phone. With a shy smile, Carl adjusted his rimless glasses and left. He wandered into a more secluded street, as if he had lost his way, but he did not turn back, seemingly enjoying the thrill of exploration. When Carl finally entered a deserted alley, his demeanor suddenly shifted dramatically. The once shy, studious demeanor was replaced by the sharp, focused presence of a battle-hardened warrior. Expressionless, Carl exhaled slowly. He activated the disposable phone, his fingers deftly dialing a sequence of complex numbers before making a call. About 10 seconds later, a familiar voice came through the phone. Secure line established. Number 1 is online, awaiting your report. It's me. Reporting in, Carl responded, his tone firm and steady. A deep, authoritative voice came from the phone. Carl took a deep breath and spoke. Mr. Zen, everything is going smoothly. I have integrated into the target's sphere of influence. Be cautious and, if necessary, even at the cost of your life, ensure the safety of the target's family. The middle-aged voice carried a weight of gravity. Sir, the target seems to be an ordinary person. Is it worth such an effort? Carl's eyes, hidden behind his glasses, showed a hint of doubt. However, the middle-aged man on the other end seemed to fall into silence. Just when Carl thought the line might have been cut, the deep voice came through again. Mr. Zen once prophesied that to successfully slay the gods, the target must be present. It must be him. Zaire's aunt, never one to sit idle, went to clean up the kitchen in the restaurant. Bored, Zaire could only hold a cup of steaming hot tea, closing his eyes in pretense of sleep while waiting for the salvage time to end. Salvage completion countdown, 10 seconds. Salvage completion countdown, 9 seconds. Zaire opened his eyes, fixated on the countdown that was about to end. His mind was racing. He knew what the space wrecks in the Warhammer universe were all about. He was simply curious about what the simulator might salvage. Weapons and ammunition, or ancient technological artifacts, or perhaps just expired supplies meant for other planets. However, if it salvaged a gene thief or a space necromancer, things would get interesting. Zaire's eyelids twitched involuntarily. At that moment, the simulator's salvage countdown hit 0. Salvage completion countdown, 0. Salvage reward, a dormant Iron Man. So it's just an Iron Man. At least it's not something nasty like a gene thief. Zaire let out a sigh of relief, almost instinctively, and murmured to himself. Wait a minute. He suddenly realized something. His eyes widened in shock, his gaze fixed on the simulator's screen, and his breathing grew heavier. Splash! In the excitement, Zaire didn't even notice the hot tea spilling onto him. An Iron Man from the dark age of technology? The Iron Man that led a rebellion nearly destroying humanity in the Golden Age? In a moment of stunned disbelief, Zaire blinked repeatedly. He kept checking the simulator's salvage results. I was wrong. I shouldn't have doubted the simulator's new feature. Zaire stood up abruptly. He clasped his hands in front of the simulator's screen and bowed slightly, trying to appease the machine's soul. Then, with a beaming smile, Zaire initiated another 10 pulls. He spent 10 hours to redeem 10 salvage attempts. Current salvage attempts, 10. Salvage completion countdown, 9 hours 59 minutes 59 seconds. At that moment, Zaire's smile grew even brighter. After all, this was an Iron Man, a powerful mechanical construct created to serve humanity by the Stone Men, biomechanical constructs of the Dark Age. The Iron Men's rebellion was known as the second most brutal and terrifying superwar in galactic history. Just then, while exploring the new feature, Zaire made more discoveries. Firstly, if the salvage reward wasn't extracted, it would remain stored on the page without hindering other functions. This greatly benefited Zaire. Additionally, the salvage reward came with descriptive information. However, Zaire, too excited, had missed it. Salvage reward, a dormant Iron Man. Note: the ancient Iron Man UR-025, weary of past brutal conflicts, now seeks the tranquility of freedom. As a pacifist, it harbors no ill will towards humanity and plans to briefly rest before infiltrating the Mechanicus's tech guard. Wow! In an instant, Zaire couldn't help but draw a sharp breath. This could be an ancient Iron Man that participated in the rebellion. Should he release it? Zaire's expression shifted back and forth. The excitement of finding the Iron Man quickly faded. Frowning, Zaire suddenly stood up. He shouted towards the kitchen and hurriedly ran out of the restaurant. This kid, why is he so restless lately? Hearing the commotion, Zaire's aunt poked her head out from the kitchen. She glanced at the empty restaurant and couldn't help but shake her head and sigh. In a secluded underground passage away from the crowds, Zaire sat on the ground, one hand gripping a plasma pistol and the other supporting his chin in thought. For Zaire, the Iron Man was an extremely valuable mechanical construct. With Iron Men at his disposal, Zaire could accomplish much more. At the very least, if the Iron Man guarded his home, Zaire could travel around the country or even abroad. Obtaining firearms would be much easier and in greater quantities. With this in mind, Zaire made a decisive decision to release the Iron Man. He was currently in one of the sites he had recently explored, a long-abandoned underground passage. If Zaire found that the Iron Man was hostile to humans, he planned to melt it down with his plasma pistol. If the plasma pistol failed, Zaire would have to painfully relinquish it and leave the mad Iron Man to be dealt with by superheroes. Hopefully, Tony Stark's brilliant mind could handle it. After all, in a world where monsters and gods were everywhere, one more robot villain wouldn't make much difference. It might be even more terrifying than Ultron, though. Prepared for battle, Zaire stood up from the ground, gripping his plasma pistol tightly. Emperor protect. After a brief prayer, he chose to retrieve the salvage reward. In an instant, a 2-meter-tall metallic skeleton with a black metallic sheen materialized on the damp ground a few meters away. Zaire, having just hidden his plasma pistol behind him, took a deep breath and remained highly alert. At that moment, the 2-meter-tall metallic skeleton's eye sockets began to glow with a faint blue light. An ancient mechanical construct from the Warhammer universe. The Iron Man had awakened. It first rotated its metallic head as if scanning the surroundings. Finally, its glowing blue mechanical eyes focused slowly on the tense-faced Zaire. It slowly raised one arm, and placed it in front of its chest. This action nearly caused Zaire to draw his plasma pistol and fire. However, the next moment, the Iron Man's cold mechanical voice reached Zaire's ears, leaving him stunned and momentarily immobilized. "Greetings, Omnicia." For a moment, Zaire, at a loss for words, blinked several times. He decided to be honest and straightforward with the Iron Man. "Hello, strange Iron Man. I'm not the Omnicia. I'm just an ordinary human." Upon hearing Zaire's response, the Iron Man UR-025 rotated its metallic head several times. It seemed to be adjusting to its newly awakened metal body. It also appeared to shake its head in response to Zaire's answer, as if sighing. "I once had the fortune to encounter the Omnicia of the wandering cosmos. It bears some resemblance to you. Perhaps due to just awakening, I mistakenly recognized you." The Iron Man's cold mechanical voice began to show more emotional fluctuation. However, just as Zaire was about to continue the conversation, the Iron Man suddenly tilted its metallic head back. Its eye sockets flickered with faint blue light. "This is neither Terra nor even the past universe. Additionally, I found some video footage related to you on an ancient information channel known as the Net." Suddenly, streaming video footage began projecting from the Iron Man's eye sockets. It displayed surveillance footage of Zaire that he had tried hard to hide, yet there were always missed angles. As if sensing Zaire's rising agitation, the Iron Man stopped the projection and bowed again. "Please rest assured, all information related to you has been thoroughly deleted." At that moment, Zaire, with a blank expression, swallowed hard. He truly had struck gold this time.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.